to the final presentations for the Spring 2023 Game Development 2 class. Without really any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So our first team is going to be team number X, where X is a number from 1 to 8. Which number are you? 7. Team number 7. All right. Their game Recolor. Okay. Thank you. Let's give them a hand.
All right, so we're team number 7, and we did a game called Recolor. So I'm Via. I was a programmer.
Hey, I'm Tony. I'm another programmer.
I'm Cindy, and the other artist is Elias, who is not here.
I'm David. I'm the narrative designer.
I'm Marcos. I'm the sound designer.
By artists for artists. So you are an artist struggling to follow your dreams. And in order to conquer your demons, you revisit your past works, trying to make them better. And after all, a picture tells 1,000 words.
So initially we had to pitch 3 ideas. Our first idea for a game was a potion brewing fighting game with RPG elements where you would travel the map and you would learn new potion recipes. And you would learn new fighting styles from NPCs to customize your kit and fight battles. Our second game was a turn-based RPG set in a computer world where you would go around the map freeing characters trapped in code to try and rebel against the developers that made the program. And the reason why we ended up choosing Recolor to make with our game was the scope seemed the most reasonable, and it seemed the general consensus was that most people liked Recolor the most.
Okay, so the most important thing going into design for us was getting an idea of reasonable scope for each position, and we didn't want our scope to constrain exploring the ideas that we found exciting. So instead, we just went into exciting ideas with the thought process of how do we make this exciting idea reasonable for everyone to implement so that we can have a finished product in time. So another thing we did during our design process was that we outlined general ideas and potential ways to deepen each idea, but in terms of actually fleshing out each idea, we waited for each milestone and saw what was coming up, what was expected of us, and zoomed in on each design aspect accordingly. So the first milestone we had was first playable, which was mainly about implementing the core mechanics. So we did a paintbrush sort of mechanic in which players could use the mouse to draw lines and use them as a platform, or to make silly pictures like shown in the image. So from this, we had playtesting, and we had some design ideas that we may not have had otherwise. The cube that we had as a placeholder would rotate upon moving on the platforms, so players liked to watch that happen, so we're like, let's make a spinning character. Players liked to test the limit of the mechanics, so we're like, let's level design a little bit around that. And players had fun with the mechanics, so that showed us that we were on the right track.
For the alpha build, we designed the collage method, the collage component, where you would be able to place different items around the map. Some would be heavy, some would be light, and we made a level based around paint and collage. From this, we learned that these 2 mechanics work for levels, and we also gained some ideas for level 3. For our beta, we gave each component their own levels, and we also made it a little too difficult, and so we learned we had to scope down on the difficulty, or at least help the player know where they have to go in order to continue.
So in terms of mechanics, we have the level 1 mechanic with the previously mentioned paintbrush. With the paintbrush, you can pretty much draw whatever you want to do whatever you want. If there's a gap and you need to cross it, you could draw your own platform, or if there's projectiles coming at you, you could draw a line to block the projectiles. And then in level 2, we have the collage mechanic, where you're given the ability to create a variety of different objects that you can use to progress throughout a level, such as using an object to press a button, using an object to fling yourself using a seesaw, or using moving text box platforms to get where you need to go. And also at the end of each level, you have the option to save a picture of your whole level. And throughout the level, when you use these mechanics, whether you paint or place collage objects, the items will fade out. So you'll be able to get a whole picture of your creations, whatever it be, whether you draw something wacky or create something silly with your collage.
Okay, so for art direction, level 1, I decided to go with landscapes because in a platformer, like, it essentially is a landscape, so it kind of just made sense. And then I went through a couple of iterations of like what kind of paint I wanted to use because I wanted it to look like a work of art. I essentially decided to go with watercolor because it was the easiest to work with, and I just overall liked the way it looked. And I wanted it to have a seasonal theme, but I ended up only making it a winter theme just because I thought it had like a really nice like flow to it. And yeah, so level 2 is abstraction and collage. So it's essentially like a paper cutout aesthetic that is an experimental piece, but the artist kind of dislikes it, hence why we're going back to change it. Most of the assets are made out of the same one collage that is made out of the objects that you can drop within the collage level. So it was kind of interesting to see how like I could make different things out of this one collage. And then finally the character is cartoony to contrast the very texturized environments that I created. Okay, and here is a bunch of concept art just to like show you the design process I went through. So you see the level 1 is the winter aesthetic, and then level 2 we have the collage aesthetic, which essentially looks pretty much the same as it does in game. And then what is interesting is all of the character iterations we went through. So we wanted it to be a person, but everyone liked the spinning of the red square so much that we decided to go with an animal that spun. So then I was like, oh yeah, maybe a ferret. Like that would be cool because it rolls up. But since I wasn't in charge of it, we ended up going with a cat, which is in the game now, which it wasn't for beta, but it's okay, it is in the game now.
All right, so for narrative design, so like as we said, you play as an artist who is facing many problems. You're struggling to be an artist. You have deadlines coming up, you have financial problems, you can't pay for a rent, and you're also losing your passion for art, and you're kind of like burnt out, and as you start questioning if this is the right path for you, you're given this one last chance to regain your passion for art by revisiting your past pieces.
For the background music for the hub, I chose a nostalgic or homey chord progression. I made it a pretty slow piece. It's just something for the player to be there. It's their home. For level 1, I chose very high-pitched notes, and I made it a more calmer piece, as it's since the painting's landscape. But I still added some faster elements, as there still is danger in this landscape. For level 2, the collage level, I put a bunch of instruments such as woodblocks, tambourines, and I think I have bells also in there to make it like a little collage, a lot of different instruments to make it fun. My sound effects, since the collage items were based on real things, I had a lot of fun going around just recording stuff and having to edit it on Audacity. That's something I'd like to explore more and do again later.
Yeah, so we each have one important lesson to share. Mine is like art versus asset production. I had a hard time finding a balance between like the functionality of like making platforms versus making it look like it's a work of art, because this is a game about art. You want it to look like art. So in the end, I feel like I struck a pretty good balance between like making it look like a piece of art and having good functional assets. But yeah, that's my lesson.
All right, so for me, like, one thing I learned was that even if you have this grand world that you want to show, you're not always given like the chance to show everything. So I had to like try to show as much as I can in a limited space, and yep, that's one thing I learned.
A lesson in communication is that you have to be able to say what you can't or can't do. You're not working by yourself. You have a whole team. So if you lie, oh, I can do it, and then you don't do it, you're just dragging the whole team down, especially on a project for classes like this. And you have to find ways to be able to accommodate that or meet the middle ground. You can't do X really fancy art or X fancy song. Do an all right song, something that fits.
So with creating art and having an idea that you're trying to produce all of it and show it to the audience, there's sometimes a lot of self-doubt that comes up when you're unable to articulate your idea the way that you want. And instead of letting that kind of control you and constrain yourself to saying, oh, I can only do this, I can only do this, push beyond those thoughts, push beyond that self-doubt, and in doing so, you can seize opportunities that you might have never seized if you didn't try for it.
And one challenge we all faced was that prior to this project, none of us really had any level design experience, so we had to experiment a lot with that. And one of our main inspirations for creating levels was the Mario level design philosophy. We tried referencing that a lot.
All right, so for our future goals, our group is pretty passionate about this project, so we are planning to take this further than GD2. So some things we want to add is, first of all, level 3. We have like an initial idea of what it's going to be like. So as you can see in the corner, it will be rainbow scratch paper themed, which will be on the artist going back to his childhood and revisiting the time when he first felt like joy of art. And also we plan to add more dialogue and collectibles so we can add more backstory for the player.
And now we're going to go on to presenting the build of our game and showing you all what it looks like, doing a little playtest of it. All right. So this is the hub that we have, which also kind of functions as the level select. This is where we would like to implement the bulk of our narrative. By interacting with your paintings, you can enter a level. So this is the first level, and it's kind of themed on a winterscape, as we said. Ink up in the upper corner is a limited resource that is depleted every time you draw lines. So one thing with level design, this level was altered a lot. So here we introduced the concept of dangerous spikes so that later down the line when you see the dangerous spikes and icicles, you will know what to do in this situation. We have some platforming mechanics implemented into our game because we thought it was important to offer the players a bit of freedom in how they navigated a level, whether they rely more on drawing or whether they rely more on double jumping and whatnot. So we tried to do more with the painting mechanic than just drawing lines. So with the interactions with the overhead icicles and with the boulder rolling down, yeah. So another thing that we wanted to implement, which would also further help with level design, are collectible objects. And as we talked about, that's something that we're planning on implementing in the future. So, and another thing too, with the level design that we had to keep in mind was the camera design and how it moves around the player. So in the first part, the camera had the player on the right part of the screen. And now this part, the player's on the left part of the screen. And the player's kind of compelled to always move towards that middle point, which kind of points them to the end goals that they need to meet. And also, like, there's more in the camera view, so the player can actually see the next part that they get to. Here's the final picture, which you have the option to save to your computer. It'll be saved to a special part of your images on your computer, special folder just for the game. So we're coming up on level 2 now, which is focused on the collage mechanic. This too utilizes the ink sort of resource meter with every action that you do. So there's multiple mechanics here, each correlating to a key. So we have seen in the first part the light object, second part heavy object. This is a moving text platform. And one choice that we made with these moving text platforms is to have quote-unquote neutral words, just kind of relate like art terms, move side to side, and then positive words are like uplifting, so they will literally lift you up into the air. Here's a fun mechanic with our heavy objects, and that's using them as a opportunity to use the seesaw and have it like fling you up really high into the air. So we're looking at more neutral words here. We're looking at more spikes because who doesn't love spikes in level design? One thing about this level that stands out from the previous level is this is a bit more focused on puzzles rather than platforming. So this up here is probably the most difficult puzzle, in which you need to place down an object, kind of roll it behind the boundary you can't go past, and then use a text platform to lift it up and hit the button on the top. And from here, the level is just kind of making use of the text platforms because a lot of the other elements were more focused on dropping objects. And that's about the gist of this level. It's kind of just walking through this part right now. Does anyone else want to say something? All right. This has more kind of decorative objects than level 1. You kind of have seen them strewn about on the seesaws at the end of the level there. And yeah, that was a quick playthrough of the levels that we currently have implemented. We kind of got the programmer to do this, and Tony's really good at running through the levels, so we can't guarantee the same short play time for other players, but still. And that's about it. So, are there any questions? Yeah? So, the calendar is something that we wanted to have like implemented narratively. We have the basis of a narrative system set up. So that will be an interactable object in the future, and that is kind of related to the narrative of an artist being like overwhelmed with deadlines, and that's like a very present object to show that. We'll maybe even add like more deadlines circled in the calendar later, you know. Anyone else? Yes? That's difficult to say. One thing about 2D art that kind of makes it challenging, and we've talked about this with our design, is that 2D art in some way or form is essentially putting objects on paper. So it's kind of hard to do that in like a variety of ways. So I think in the future we may want to explore the idea of what makes 3D art unique and somehow integrate that into a level design. As of right now, there hasn't really been any discussion of like what mediums to pursue in 3D art. One thing that we also have discussed is combining like the mechanics from level 1 and level 2, because during our alpha we showed that there is the option of a more difficult level that combines elements from both, kind of focused on like moving objects around using the paintbrush to get the objects to different places that they need to be for solving puzzles and whatnot. Yes? All right, so yeah, way back early in our design, we thought of kind of having like multiple tools that an artist could like equip at different times, each providing different functionality. And that kind of idea was difficult to integrate, like again with the 2D kind of art discussion, we're like, oh, but the pencil and the paintbrush aren't very different mechanically, we can't really do that. So we kind of just, as a result, broke things up into different mechanics that seemed like distinct from one another. Like one thing we discussed if we were to go with like the equip different tools idea was like somehow like taking mechanics that are like common in platforming games, like a grappling hook, and like tying that to something else, like a thread and needle somehow being used for a grappling hook. But instead of kind of focusing on mechanics that are commonly found in platformers, I guess, we tried to focus in on the things that stood out the most in our design. Yes? Do you want to speak on that, or?
So essentially, we wanted to do something similar where at the beginning of the level, you would have a safe environment to experiment, like how in the beginning of the first level, there wasn't much threat. There was just gaps that if you fell down, you would die. So you just, you had a brief period of being able to just draw and experiment, but later on in the level, when you would encounter the spikes or the rolling boulder, you'd have to get creative and, think, how could I use the paintbrush to counter those obstacles? And then similarly in the collage level, you have a safe environment where the only challenge is to use a collage object to push a button down, and then later you have to use the seesaw mechanics where you have to jump through the air, try not to fall down, and also try not to land on the spikes, and then later navigate through whole spike rooms to get to the end of the level where you kind of have to be a little precise, otherwise you have to start back at the previous checkpoint.
Have you considered putting like end flags? Because I noticed that like when you get to the end of the level, it's kind of like not really obvious that you're at the end.
Yeah.
Especially for like the first one, 'cause I kind of thought that when you finally made it to the end, there would be more, and it just was like, oh, here's the next one. I was like, oh, okay. Honestly, we didn't really think of anything to put at the end of the level, but definitely some sort of indication that it is the end of the level should be necessary, and it is something that we can add in the future.
I really like how you all mentioned some takeaways that you had based on your experience. And I'm curious that from that, what would you implement in the next project that you work on this year? You mean like in terms of the whole process? Yeah, from a process standpoint, is there anything you learned from the takeaway?
I think for me personally, it's not having like an idea of what I want everything to look like right from the start. I think it's a lot better to like reference media that already exists to try and draw inspiration instead of having something totally unrealistic in my head, because like I said, like I wanted the levels to look just like landscapes, like art pieces, but that's just not something that you can achieve like A, in this amount of time, and B, like for game art in general. Like it was the matter of like functionality versus what it looks like.
I guess I can speak a little bit about that. So I like kind of try to implement things I have learned on previous game dev projects coming into like project management kind of stuff, and like managing things in terms of like scope and stuff like that. One takeaway is that like even if you do think that things will be reasonable, there's a lot going on with school and unpredictable schedules, so you'll never really know like to what degree you'll be able to complete things. I guess an interesting idea to explore would be kind of like setting different levels of integration goals, so that way you can say like this is the bare minimum that we need to do, but we want to get to this level, so that way we can like feel like we're making a complete product quicker, rather than like being like we want to have this implemented and it needs to be perfect once we have it implemented, so we'll be waiting on that for a while. I think it's better to just say like let's get these things implemented when we can, and kind of just like being okay with like going back to things that were like set as a goal once. Like the deadline has come once, we can revisit that deadline later and like make things better, rather than just saying this needs to be done now, and like that's like the deadline, and everything kind of just revolves around that deadline, because that can also kind of if there's dependencies or anything like that, it can kind of get a bit messy if that situation ends up happening. Any other questions? All right, looks like we're good. Thank you all.
Group 7 for being the first one to go up. That's a big deal. For future projects, for future presentations here, just to smooth things out, this microphone does not work currently. This microphone does work, so you don't have to pass it back and forth. Yeah. So we can use this as well. Is that still working? Okay. The volume meter doesn't change. So is this all right for volume-wise? Okay. So future presentations, if you're sitting here, you feel free to use this instead of passing the mic back and forth. And people can stand down here as well. Just try not to be too clumped together. Again, this was not way on Team 7. Thank you for being our little test dummies. Team 5, get up here. I'm going to be sitting over in the front area right here, and I'll be giving you hand signals for time. That was originally Jack, but he was too far away. No one looked at him.
If we could repeat the answer or the question? Yeah. Okay. I see. Okay.
Alright, this is Monster Cuisine.
I think that's on.
Let's do that.
All right, so our game is Monster Cuisine. And of course, the team is Kieran, programmer, Josh, programmer, Beck, who aided me in the narrative design. I'm Matthew, I focused on the sound design and narrative. Wenfei and Jess are lovely artists. Everyone did a really good job on this project, I'd say. So, our concept. It's basically a restaurant simulator, you know, with monsters being the key ingredient. So, you know, forget cows. Oh, closer? Okay. Forget cows, forget chickens. You're gonna be hunting giant toads, all right? That's it. But of course, you know, you don't want to get your hands dirty. You gotta cook the food. So you have to hire hunters to do it for you. Oh. Now, at one point, we did toy with the idea that the original concept we came up with was that you would be hunting. But then we kind of realized that melding the two ideas of hunting and the restaurant would just really feel like just you're playing two different types of game, like two different games entirely. So we decided to go with the more favorable option for us, the restaurant. The other ideas we also kind of pitched around was a kind of a fishing simulator, which would then turn into a Street Fighter game, and a game where you'd play as like a little shadow, and it'd be kind of like a shadow tag. So, with the game loop, you of course hire monster hunters, right? So then you send them out to get ingredients of the various monsters to varying success. You know, of course, there is chance for failure, and they could definitely die. Hopefully they don't, though. You know, you don't want to spend extra gold on to get a new one. Then, of course, you make these delicious foods and meals for your various customers, and so forth. And, of course, once those are done, you can hand them to the customers and the possible critic to earn reputation and gold. Okay, you can left jump All right. So, as you can see, the left one is a instance of one of our hunters. Rosamaris. She is a herbalist, and an herbalist is one of the classes not really meant for fighting, but more so meant for like material gathering. The other additional classes are barbarian and mage, and they're the ones who do the most of the brunt work of the fighting, which would eventually lead to getting one of these ingredients, such as the frog legs, which, as you can see, come from various regions, such as the Ronalis jungle and the Wenatchee forest.
So after you've sent your hunters out, you want to come back and be able to cook your way to fame. So the entire game is very, very UI driven. So we wanted to try and have an emphasis on responsiveness and always having some interaction with the user to indicate what is actually happening. So we spent a good chunk of our time during development on UI design, since the main focus of our game is interacting with these systems and not necessarily doing any action combat or going out and fighting these monsters yourself. So these are just some examples of some of the stations that we have that you'd be able to craft at. So after you craft, we see on the table, you can enjoy your crafted meals. So we have around a dozen different recipes you're going to be able to craft, coming from different regions, having sent out your hunters. So ideally, once you've made these recipes, advancing the better hunters you have and the further out into the wilderness you can explore, you'll bring them over to the critic, and he will evaluate your food and based off of the region and the quality of the meat, and he will increase your reputation as he sees fit.
So one thing we focused very heavily on was UI art. So these are some of the many different arts designs that we have for the cooking stations. And what we've done is really add responsiveness to them. So you'll see that when we go into the demo, but when you hover over a certain icon, it will tell you that, it will highlight it and tell you you're right here. We have also done it so that if you see on the left side, we have icons highlighted in different colors. Those represent the different types of ingredients. And what we've done is in the background of every single slot in the cooking stations is that we highlighted in the color that they represent. So the red one would be the primary meat and so on. That way it makes it a lot more intuitive where everything goes inside the cooking station and you won't feel as lost. The second thing we've done is that we have made it so whenever you hover over a region, it will highlight it, and therefore showing you that, showing you where you are and what region you actually are going into. You don't see that here, but you'll see that in the demo as well. And thirdly, something that we somewhat struggled on was how to communicate to the player how to craft a recipe. And what we decidedly ended up with was creating a recipe book. Similar to how you have a cooking or how you follow a recipe at home, you would follow this recipe whenever you go to cook something that you don't know how to. And in there you'll see some of the key ingredients, some of the key stations, and learn more about kind of the process, because if you guys saw earlier, you don't actually cook the meat yourself, you are somewhat just placing them inside a UI. So this kind of brings you a bit more into the world that you are in. Yep.
So as we've talked about a lot so far, a big focus is responsiveness. So we have a completely UI and system-driven experience in this game. And so with more systems and more UIs, there's many, many different routes that a player could take. So ideally, the player needs to know what they did right, what they did wrong, what route they're supposed to take, if their mouse is hovering over something, if they can interact with it, how can you interact with something in the environment, what in the environment you can interact with. So we've tried to address these issues with tooltips, shader highlighting, and other features to try and guide the player towards the end goal. One of those is mainly the book as well, because we have this crafting system. There's no way the player is going to assume what we know and be able to craft automatically. So that book was a very, very key ingredient in being able to bring the game together, because you need to be able to use it as a roadmap to figuring out what am I supposed to do. So you look at the book, you look at the station, you read the ingredients, and you're like, oh, I need these ingredients. I can go over to the map. I can see what ingredients each map has, and I can try and get those recipes. And I can use that with what the critic wants in order to progress through the game. So there's these systems interact with each other and try and push the player forward towards this critic endgame, where they try and, we have a 5-star rating system, so they try and get a 5-star restaurant. So very important lessons that we've learned during this development is never assume the players can really understand what systems you've made and how to interact with them. It is, especially when you have multiple, it's very difficult. And especially when you have a lot of different systems, they need to have some coherent design, which is also a challenge in itself. So we tried our best to have the UI art and the different animations and highlighting that plays have some sort of a cohesive design with the same, using the same keys, using the same shaders, and so on.
All right, so let's put these words into action, okay? So let's play the game. Oops. Sorry? Let me just use this one. So here we are loading into a new game, and you also have the option to save the game later on down the road, so we'll show that off later. To actually load into the game, you spawn inside the bedroom next to the map that you are able to interact with. If you walk up to, you can see you have to click E to interact with the map. You're also able to click tab to see your inventory and the critic, and what the critic wants, as well as the amount of gold you have and your roster. As well, you're able to see your recipe book down at the bottom, which displays the different stations and some of the recipes that we were talking about earlier. These will also pop up on the correct page when you go down to the stations. So as the game progresses, you will have to go hire hunters that you'll find down here. You will see when you click E on it, you'll see the board a bit bigger, and you can see some hunters you can buy. Right now they're free because you are just starting out. After you receive your hunters, you'll see them in your roster, and you can buy up to 5 hunters in the beginning. So here's a big part of the game, the hunting. So you would go into the map, you would choose the region that you would want to hunt in, and click on it. You currently don't have any hunters in your party, as they're only in your roster, so you would have to drag them in or just click on them to add them, and you will see their name, their class, level, and survivor rate, as well as their success rate and the ingredients you can get. As we saw earlier, we explained earlier with Herbalist, the Herbalist is a special class that really, its only real purpose is to allow you to gather regional ingredients. So if you see an ingredient list, once you remove the Herbalist, you're no longer able to get a lot of the ingredients in there. So if we add her back to the team and then run the hunt, we'll get a bit of information on the how the hunt went, as well as some of the ingredients you gathered. And you can do these videos however many times you want. However, once you have hired your ingredients that you can see in your inventory now, you can also see what type they are by right-clicking on them, as well as you can also right-click on your hunters to see more about their stats, monsters they're strong or weak to, as well as a bit of like a description. But you want to cook the meat, right? Make sure I have everything. So you would go down to the station. First, we want to know. So our critic is asking for curry made from frog leg and their offspring. So you would go into your into your recipe book and figure out which station this frog leg curry comes from. It is on the first page right here underneath the pot station, so you would want to go into your game world and find where exactly that station is. We have a lot of stations around that will highlight upon you looking at them, and right here we see the pot. So if we enter the pot, we are then random cooking station in the game, you can kind of just look through the recipes that way as well. Inside the recipe, we see that we need to add lard to the broth, toss the frog legs, and after some time, add the eggs as well. So we add the lard into it, the spot with the orange background, as well as the frog legs and the frog eggs. It's also asking for rice, lemongrass, and ginger. Yep. So I'll speed through this a bit because I already know it. But once you've cooked it, you see the recipe or the dish pop out, and you can pick it up or you can store it in your inventory. I want to go deliver this to the critic who's sitting over here, and as he was asking for it in your inventory, he gave me gold as well as an update in what type of recipe he wants. So now I would go back up to the hunting menu and click on the new region that opened up that you'll see has what's called different monsters in it. But however, I'm kind of weak, so I would want to go back up and level up. Oh yeah, we also see that the mage is, if you look in here, we see the phoenix and the titan frog, but we see the mage is actually weak to the phoenix. So what we would probably want to do was go down and grab another barbarian. You see that you're able to buy higher level hunters when you upgrade your restaurant. Now we move the hunter and add the barbarian. This is the barbarian. The survival rates have greatly increased, but you could also level them up even more if you want to. I'll take the risk, I guess. Oh no, one of my hunters died, but we did successfully get through with the hunt. Yeah, so that is essentially the whole gameplay loop, and you would walk through every stage, every region. Yeah, so if you want to save your progress, go into your main menu, save the progress, and then you can exit the game. Cool. That's it for the demo.
I'll be taking any questions.
Can't really see anything. Oh, yes.
I think this is really awesome. I like your concept a lot. I think the game looks really solid. I really appreciated how early on you made the distinction between the two different game loops of hunting and then cooking. You decided just to focus on the one. I like that. That was a really intelligent decision. I appreciate your focus on UX, especially the responsiveness, connectivity, and all the stuff that you're talking about. I can see a lot of ways that this game can be expanded upon. I'm interested to know if you guys continue working this and bring it forward, like if you were to do that, what way would you want to see this expanded on? What systems would you add? And how would you bring it forward?
Actually, we had a lot of things that we had to scrap due to time constraints, and some of those being a bartering system, where in case you have extra ingredients or you want to upgrade a hunter that not solely through hunting, you could maybe buy some equipment for them through bartering with your customers, or they may be able to unlock a different weapon or something like that. As well, if there's an ingredient you have a lot of that you don't want, you can maybe give it off to someone who sells the raw ingredients rather than the full recipes. We'd also seen that a lot of response that we wanted a post-combat hunter screen. After you complete the hunt, a little summary of what happened during the hunt, which is something we unfortunately, we really wanted to include, but we unfortunately didn't have the time for. Maybe like a little picture that showed Hunter Bartholomew standing victorious over a phoenix or something like that, which would add a lot more flavor to the game. Or something on the side as well, like a text adventure, like seeing how the hunters interact with the monsters. Because a lot of that is happening behind the scenes in a simulation that we weren't able to bring light to. Yes, we also had a very, very expensive, so you only saw 2 recipes in there, but we had about 7 in the game currently, and that could be expanded upon however much you want, not just recipes that you give to the, recipes you give to the critic, but also maybe just side recipes that you would just do so you can get more gold or something similar like that.
Yeah. On a really quick note though, one of the focuses in design as we were making this game, one of the main focuses where we wanted to be able to create systems that were easily scalable, so we would end up trying to be limited by how much art we would be able to create. We didn't want to have that bottleneck on the programming side. So if we want to have more recipes, more ingredient, we wanted a very streamlined method for the artist to be able to interact with the engine. So we did spend a good chunk of development in order to expand upon that system. So if we were to continue working on this project in the future, it'd be a much more streamlined workflow to be able to add much more expanding regions or ingredients or even monsters. And definitely you saw we only had 2 hunters, or we had 3 hunters, 2 that only had real combat abilities. But one major thing we wanted to add was more variety, because it does get a little bit stale only having the same 3 classes from day 1.
Does that answer your question? Yes.
What lessons have you learned that you're going to take into future projects?
What lessons have we learned that we're going to take into future projects?
Well, the main lesson that we've been talking about is UX design and responsiveness. That is, for our future projects, that is probably the main thing we'll take away. One other thing is, during development, when you're creating these systems, like the hunter simulation, you really have no idea what's going on until we end up creating a UI that presents it. Now we could print it to the console or have like a verbose flag that prints a bunch of text that tells you what happens, but that's really not very interesting. It's not very intuitive to know what's happening behind the scenes. So we also learned that during development, even making very crummy UIs that sole purpose is not for production, but just there to guide developers and artists too who want to see what's happening with the system. It's important to be able to create smaller UIs like that even though in the grand scheme they won't serve a purpose for releasing the game, for development it is very crucial.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, like, I think one thing that I've learned is not only with scope, but like, I kind of like dip my toes in several different fields, and I found that like I wasn't able to do all the things that needed to get done. I was project manager for this, but I was also the artist and 3D modeler. So I wasn't able to do fully of everything that I wanted to do, but I think that's also because of our scope is just so big. So yeah, but over time I kind of realized I just really need to focus on getting work done. So it's kind of like scope for individuals. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned testing. I'm really curious what that process looked like for your team. Like how often you tested with players, and then how you all took that feedback and decided that.
So for testing, it's really important that we test our own systems for functionality to make sure there's no bugs, but testing also with other like friends, family, coworkers, it's very, very important to test with people that have no idea how to play your game, because they'll take a path that you never thought of before and find a bug, which is why QA is always super important. But they'll also tell you, I have no idea what's going on. And that was we heard that a lot while developing these systems, is especially, we want to have, when you right-click the ingredient or when you right-click the hunter, it shows a little UI that pops up. We had feedback that people did not realize that was even a feature and they just missed over it while playing the game. So we added, when you press tab, it shows on the bottom of the inventory a left-click and it says drag, and it's a right-click and it says info. And so we kept getting a lot of feedback that players wouldn't, especially interacting with things as well. So that's why we added that yellow backlit glow, Because in our minds, like, oh, there's a cooking station, you walk up, you press E. E is super traditional in first-person games to interact. But then we had feedback from players who aren't so familiar in the genre, and they're just walking around having no clue what they're supposed to do, what they can interact with, especially what button. So that's why we add, whenever you look at something interactable, it's a big obvious glow, and it shows you the button you have to press to perform that interaction.
Any other questions? Can't really see.
Very bright.
It is very bright. All right. Thank you.
Hello, hello.
1, 2, check 1, 2.
Cool. You have to get close. Yeah, it's not gonna get any louder. Cool, hello everyone, we're Team 1, this is the Dreamscape project. So our team, hi, I'm Jackson, I do the gameplay programming. Mari, they do our level design and level design programming, everything associated with that. Issa and Scott do our 3D modeling, animation, and texturing. Sean does our narrative design, and Alan is our composer and sound designer.
1 second, because it's not updating on the screen.
Oh.
That's it, guys. It's over. Bye, thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
So we are a third-person open-world exploration and puzzle game focusing around a young adult with a passion for art, but is in a different job right now and trying to switch fields, but finds himself unable to. Our player goals are to unlock their background over time, to figure out what went wrong, and to become more comfortable with their insecurities over time.
Cool, so we're gonna jump right into our demo now so you can see what the game looks like to begin with.
Hello. Okay. So Jackson's going to be playing the game, and I'll be narrating over. So this is the title screen. Basically, he's going to start off by just. This is a controller-based game rather than using the keyboard. So we mainly used Xbox layout. You're immediately dropped into the game into the forest landscape where you have to explore and experience everything on your own. You're slowly introduced to all of the very base mechanics. So right now, Jackson is approaching our brazier of fire. This introduces the first main mechanic where you're able to control and manipulate fire with your spirit. This very basic, simple lighting puzzle allows you to understand and sort of learn the controls of the floaty and sort of slippery nature of controlling the fireballs. And through this cutscene, you realize, oh, I have to do these sort of puzzles in order to go to this door and open it. There are 4 little lanterns on the top of the door to indicate that there are 4 separate puzzles that you have to find throughout the entire forest in order to complete it. Right now, Jackson is demonstrating our basic attack against one of our very simple enemies that is capable of being hit by all form of attacks. We have 3 separate enemy types that all have different attacks that you have to use. Right now, he's going to demonstrate our targeting system. So by looking at the enemy and utilizing the right trigger, you can focus on the enemy and release the spirit attack. This is another sort of attack that you can use on both this enemy and a separate type of enemy type. Essentially leaves your player vulnerable as you utilize your inner self in order to attack your insecurities in sort of a narrative sense. One of the other aspects of the game that includes the exploration is that there are items scattered throughout that sort of relieve the memories and narrative lore for the character. This is one of the items right now that we're just one of the locations. It is currently being guarded by another enemy type that is one of the more difficult types, which is why it's usually hanging around these lore items. It is a reflection of your inner self that you have to use your inner. It's a reflection of yourself. You use your inner self to attack it. It does not take the physical attacks with the stick. You have to use the spirit attack in order to kill it. It's more of a trial and error as you learn through looking at all the other enemies. This is the item menu. So whenever you collect an item, you can open up this menu and you can sort of get a look at, read the narrative lore blurb about how this item relates to the character themselves. So for instance, I think the one we picked up was an acceptance letter for college. Right now, Jackson is also currently following one of the main paths, which is very easily shown through the lighter color. This is a health item, so when you die in the game, you have to restart and do all the puzzles again. So in order to make sure that it's not really tedious, that you're dying constantly, there are various health items everywhere. This is another puzzle. This is a tonal sort of puzzle that you have to conduct a trial and error. So right now, Jackson lit the wrong torch, so it doesn't stay lit, it just automatically blows out. So in order to solve the puzzle through trial and error, you have to light all the torches in the correct order. If you do light them in the correct order, then they'll stay on. The minute you get the order wrong, everything will be distinguished, and then you have to do it all over again. You also have to keep in mind that there are enemies scattered everywhere, so you have to keep your eye out and also be very wary. Right now, he's going to try to demonstrate the correct pattern to light all the torches. And there it shows that the door, once again, you have unlocked another part of the door, and so you have two more left. The last two puzzles utilize the combat mechanics rather than more of just the simple puzzle-based mechanics. The final area utilizes both in tandem, so right now they're going to be approaching the mainly combat-based area. You mainly fight this enemy, which is it represented through an outlet, through the fire-based attacks. You cannot physically attack it or use your spirit against it. You have to use its fireballs. So it's both of a strategic sort of style where you have to keep away from the enemy and also grab the item in time and shoot it back at them. This is get you used to this sort of mechanic. You can kill it with any fireball, but in order to ensure that the player learns how to do this, there's no braziers or fire pits that you can utilize in order to gain control, so you have to use what they're shooting at you instead. The final area combines both these sort of enemies and the very basic torch lighting mechanics. In the final area where you have to utilize both in order to both kill the enemies and also explore and light the way throughout the entirety of the back area, which is currently blocked off by a wall of fire that you have to first clear in order to enter. He's just going to continue to see if he can try to kill all the enemies. This is one of the more challenging aspects. The mechanic, a lot of it is very skill based. So now that Jackson has completed 3 of the puzzles in the main set of the forest, it has unlocked the back area, which is the fire was originally covering. So now you can go and explore the final area, which also has more lore items for you to discover. So a lot of this is letting the player find their own path of where to go, and slowly reveal things as they go along. Right now, Jackson's just trying to die by the snake, and it continues to fight you because it just hates you that much. And then the game restarts, and you have to do everything over again. But now that might seem tedious at first, but once you get used to the mechanics, a lot of things can go a lot faster because you're learning how to utilize everything really quickly. And once you figure out the patterns, then you're really able to traverse everything a lot smoothly. I think this goes to you next.
Indeed.
All right, still not done.
So I want to talk about the design process and what I've learned from this whole project. First off, I wanted to work on the overarching narrative with everyone together, so that way we all had an idea of what was going to be happening throughout the game. But it was also up to me to figure out, hey, how am I also going to tell the player about the character's backstory over time, and how am I going to convey all of that naturally and make everything make sense? Afterwards, I would bring that up with the team, my like findings and my creations, and then I would refine it over and over and over again. One of the biggest things we realized pretty quickly, man, we really had to scale down at first. We had a way larger scope at first, and then we realized, oh, if we don't have nearly as much potential in that regards as much as we thought. So because of that, I had to also scale down how much info I was able to give to the player, and I had to work around that. Again, just going things over and over again was also really useful for me to get used to.
So being one of the main level designers, I had to iterate. As you can see by these 3 images, the forest went from a very large scope to being completely narrowed down in order for me to correctly guide the player throughout. You always have to assume that the player is clueless. A lot of the times during my playtesting, during the playtesting that we had, players would either get lost or that my guidance that I had originally stated wasn't clear enough. Basically, make it as clear as possible. I try to be subtle originally with my paths to make it sort of look as natural as possible because I wanted it to be a very naturalistic forest feel, but no one could really see the paths in the first place, so I just made them glaringly obvious, and 90% of the time they don't really notice. Players didn't really notice it was that obvious to begin with. They just saw, oh, there's a path. I sort of subconsciously see it. I'm going to follow it. So that kind of principle is very important. I also had to keep in constant contact with both our main programmer, mechanic designer, and also narrative, because a lot of how I designed the level also relied on what kind of story we were telling with both the lore items and also how the combat worked. So tried to avoid too many unnecessary hills for a lot of the slopes and stuff like that. Less is more. One of the major things that we are going to be discussing, which is a problem, is runtime. And with the models and stuff like that, you don't need to fill in every single nook and cranny. You have to at least make it, you can use illusions in order to make it look like it is full when it really is not. So it's a lot of trial and error in a lot of pieces that I had to redo over and over and over and over again.
Cool, so as the main gameplay programmer, a lot of my most visible work happened really early on. So as you can see in the photo, this is what I like to call our version of the tofu prototype, and pretty much all of it was made by myself because everyone else is working on their individual portions as I'm assembling things in this weird white, empty space with movement and combat. So working as fast as possible is really crucial in getting that prototype up and running so that you can get playtesting as soon as possible and so that everyone else on the team has a good sense of what is going on. So as I said, in this tofu prototype, it's pretty much just movement, combat, and camera stuff. And so immediately from our first playable, that's what our first playable looked like, and we got some really crucial feedback. One of those important pieces of feedback was that the system for targeting is actually fairly robust in terms of implementation. It pretty much just uses a combination of proximity detection and cone check, which is a collision avoidance algorithm, in order to determine which enemy it's supposed to be targeting at. But even though that's pretty straightforward from a programming perspective, from a player perspective, it's kind of hard to tell who you're targeting. And we got that feedback a lot. So we immediately went and implemented those visual indicators that you probably saw in our playtest that show both who you are currently targeting and who you would be targeting if you were to switch your target between fireball and actual enemy. There was some other stuff too with camera movement, things like that we got a lot of repeated feedback, and getting that early on was really helpful. Communicating constantly, really necessary for file organization, things like that, but also preventing implementation issues. We had some stuff with the fireballs when being used for puzzles versus being used as a projectile. There was some weird stuff going on with that, so working on that was really crucial as a team. And same with animations. I had to sit down for like a couple hours with Scott and work out some wonkiness fairly later on into the project. And then planning as far ahead as possible is always super important. It prevents burnout because if you don't know when exactly things need to get done, you're always going to feel like you're behind and always going to feel like there's things that you should be doing. Make sure that in that process, giving ourselves extra time because life happens, and also there will always be bugs or unexpected things, or things will take longer than you expect. So yeah, that was my workflow.
Hello. So there are two main takeaways that I got that I want to talk about that aren't directly related to the 3D programs that I used. First of all, I wanted to talk about not getting overzealous, having a plan from the start and sticking with it. One thing that I realized that I did was I sort of got overzealous and, skipped past the sort of ideation phase and like having a concrete vision for what I wanted the game to look like, and just was like, okay, I'm gonna work on this like 3D base for a protagonist model. And then I did it, and I was very like in the details, to a point where I somehow managed to skimp out on the details in the end, where like I wanted every vertex to be nice and in the right place. And then I was like, wait, why am I doing a base when that's not how it's done? You have to, have everything in mind. So that's one thing. Also, sort of on that vein, coming up with a vision for the game that's cohesive and it works and we don't stray from it. I feel like me and Scott both did really solid work, but it was solid work that we didn't communicate on very much. And so, sometimes you have textures that are really nice and they look great, but not on like maybe a low poly model. I'm definitely guilty of that with some of the enemies. And also, just making it so that the environment and the protagonist aren't conflicting with each other, because I was so like, oh my gosh, it has to be low poly. I'm gonna use the least amount of polygons possible, but it's our character model. Like, it's supposed to be like one of the most dense things. So, just sort of talking with you and figuring things out in that sort of way to make things more cohesive.
Yeah, and just to speak on some of the animations that you see here before you, these are two that I made. The top one is a lesson in figuring out what can work. That is a custom IK rig built from scratch. That was a mistake. That took way too long and really like bogged me down for a while just getting that done. The one underneath is really the one that should have had the custom rig. That was a chain-based rig that calculates a spline and then forms the bones to it, which works well for the slither that you see, but when it coils up, the spline really did not like formatting such sharp angles from other areas, so keyframing that in was a bear. Realistically, those two workflows should have swapped. So yeah. I don't have like huge lessons to take away necessarily, but a lot of little lessons I learned along the way. For instance, the spaghetti you can see on the left was something that I just tried because I was curious, but it is a really low poly model with then just a height map across the top of it to really give it the ridges and cavities that a spaghetti would have, which worked really well and allowed me to complete that really quickly. The tree is one of my main pitfalls. That tree started at 161,000 triangles. And I went into that with no plan, and so parsing that down was a very time-consuming process because it just wasn't a model built to be stripped down and used. The last one is probably the model I'm happiest with. It's a bunch of smaller models, smaller objects contained in the 1FBX, which allowed texturing to go really quickly and really nicely due to just being able to use fill layers and really just apply swaths of texture at a time and not have to worry about masking.
Okay, just to quickly wrap this up. So I was in charge of the soundtrack and also sound effects. So the soundtrack, I want to convey the dreamlike atmosphere that we're presenting. So I used a concert grand piano and some orchestral sample libraries to accomplish that. My inspiration came a lot from classical music. And also I used a lot of the harmony present in Ghibli Studio to create that whimsical feel. And all the sound effects were created with my mouth through a mic.
Cool, so our continuing goals, programming, bug fixes, duh, every game is gonna have bugs. Runtime improvements, the game runs fine on most computers. There's some frame rate issues on some worse machines, and that's a bit of a problem because there's some processes in the game that are frame rate dependent that shouldn't be. Fluidity of the combat and movement, and then refining some affordances to make it even more affordable.
Yeah, okay. We're just gonna wrap it up. I talked mostly about art stuff. Everything else is perfect. Thank you.
Jackson play, all I noticed him doing was just that one spirit attack. So my question is, like, what makes like the difference between like the physical and the spirit attack? Because
So that's useful for things like the puzzles, in which you want to interact with the puzzle while also not dying, because dying is pretty costly in the game. But also at the same time, there were not a lot of instances in this particular playtest where I had more than one enemy coming at me at once. But if there is more than one enemy, then you can kind of just run away forever, I guess. But really, it makes a lot more sense to be able to utilize your spirit to attack in one way while also using the physical attack to attack in a different way at the same time to essentially multitask and cover all your bases. Yes?
On your goals slide for future goals, we had a lot of really cool and lofty things there that are all very, very important. But I'm always really curious, and it's like my favorite question to ask. If you had one more week, what would you do?
That is a hard question.
No new content. That's for sure.
No, yeah.
No new content.
Here you go.
I would fix the run animation.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Thinking in terms of the environment, I probably would have utilized that time to try to help with the runtime by also figuring out how to make things load in chunks a lot better. Because at the moment, everything is loaded at once, and all the tries, when I utilized some of the tracking tools, the tries that you see at once vary based on where you're looking, but there's instances where there's like millions of tries within the camera, which is ridiculous. I tried to implement that there is an LOD system in the trees in the environment. I probably can narrow that down a lot more and also make it a lot more fluid so it's not as snappy, and making it run a lot more efficiently by also properly learning chunking for loading.
Also playtesting. You can never have enough playtesting. Yep.
Lights, that was a really good touch, and I feel like without it, it would be a different game, but it really spoke to the player on what they should do. So I think that was really good.
Thank you. Yes?
I was kind of curious on the enemy design, like this is a good plug in the outlet. What inspired you to go with that?
All right, so it's...
The question was, what was the inspiration behind enemy design?
Yeah, my apologies. All right, but I can explain that actually. The character on a day-to-day basis is an electrician, which means that even though they want to do art, they work a lot with these various sort of electrical appliances that we decided we would have those in because, you know, they're a lot more obvious to the general public as a whole, right? And because of that, that would sort of be the thing that, since they're working on it with a day-to-day basis, it's also the thing that's crushing them within their mind as well. And so that's sort of the direction we went in.
It's like a concrete manifestation of the thing that they at least want to do.
Yeah.
In the back.
I was interested in why fire was such a main motif of the game. Because when I hear, you know, the thing boggling down is electricity and I see the outlets, my mind goes to electricity. But then fire is the motif, so I guess I'm interested in that.
All right, so the question was that you're wondering why fire was such a big motif within the game. The reason that is that since we're wandering within a forest, if the forest is supposed to be like a representation of the character's artistic mind, then wouldn't the slow burning of a forest be like the antithesis of that almost? And that's sort of why we went with fire, even though the monster design might contradict it a little bit.
Sorry, not just that, but also, you know, we were sort of originally planning on having the fire represent like, oh, this is the player's insecurities, this is why, like, what's going on in their day-to-day life is eating them alive. The main explanation as to why the enemies were specifically electrical appliances, well, not appliances, but you know what I mean, it's because you said that they were the #1 cause of house fires. So sort of taking their job and combining it with like their mental state.
Yes, Chris?
So in your goal slide, you mentioned that you have some ideas for affordance improvements. I was wondering, while watching the game, I also noticed there's like you're commenting on a lot of things, but like you're just kind of doing them, not necessarily explaining. I was wondering how you might in the future be able to improve one affordances into like signposting for like trying to explain core mechanics.
So if you notice throughout the original demo, there are occasional pop-ups on the screen that sort of give instructions on how to utilize some of the certain mechanics. When I was originally designing the level, I will be completely honest, a lot of that affordance in terms of controls was a little bit of an oversight on my part. So I wanted to try to find a way to very easily and obviously convey to the player especially since a lot of the cues for some of these text blocks is like around an enemy. So like the first enemy you encounter near the beginning of the level, there's going to be a pop-up that says you can do this attack or you can do this to trigger. In terms of the narrative sense, for improvements, I would not make it pop-ups, but rather have it more diegetically within the environment itself in terms of improvements. So instead of some of your screen being blocked up by text, you can it would either diegetically be within the environment to inform you of how to do it, maybe utilizing the enemies themselves to sort of demonstrate what you're supposed to be doing rather than just telling you how to do it. So it's that sort of affordance fix by guiding the player through a less obvious, more glaring means instead making it more natural.
Real quick question. So you talked about the narrative a lot. There's some complex story themes, character development going on, or you're talking about but in the demonstration, the presentation, you've only kind of hinted at. Like we got just a taste of the story, and then you kind of stop. And you sort of talk around in the presentation as well. Is that deliberate because you don't want to spoil it for us when we're going to play it, or what's the...
So the question is regarding the amount of narrative in the playtest versus the amount of narrative in our presentation. And the amount of narrative being shown in the playtest is minimal, mostly because of our time constraints of being here right now, because the narrative is pretty much entirely conveyed diegetically through these items that you can collect, but they're very scattered around the environment, so in order to be able to go and get a significant amount of them for all of you to be able to piece together everything, we just don't have the time to do that right now. I think there's 8 different items, and most of them are in the back area, which we only unlocked at the very end before we had to end our playtest. So we're trying to get as much of that narrative to you as possible by saying it right now, but if you play through the game, you can find all these different elements that piece it together as one cohesive whole once you have everything.
Also, to add on to that, a lot of when we originally all came together to work on this project at the beginning of the semester, we really wanted to convey a very narrative-based game, and our scope was, we mentioned during the presentation, our scope was very large, and we had to reduce that significantly. And I feel like another part that we would have to our continuing goals is to actually expand upon not just having this one area, but having more than one area where we would convey this narrative. We did originally have 3 separate spaces that the player would explore within our plan. We had to narrow that down significantly due to time constraints, mainly both with our own personal schedules and also since a lot of us were kind of learning on the spot for some things. So a lot of us, we had to recognize we have to downgrade this a lot, but still try to convey as much as possible that we want to, that we feel is important.
Great, thank you.
Don't look at this. Hi, everybody.
We're Team 8, and we're here to show off our game. Discord, don't start. We're here to show off our game, Behemoth. Yeah.
Hello everyone, my name is Amanda Tadrich. I'm the 2D environmental artist and the concept artist for this game.
Here, I made all the 2D character sprites, animations, and well, there was an intent to look them up.
I'm Seth. I worked on all the sound design, both the sound effects and all of the 2 pieces of music in the game.
Johnny, programming.
I'm John. I did all the level design, and I was also the 3D modeler, even though we ended up not using 3D modeling in our game.
I'm Jack. I'm the narrative lead.
So before we get into it, we thought we'd show you guys a little bit of a trailer. Let me just make sure. So this is just a short snippet of our intro cutscene that will play as you start the game. Peter, and the text was written up by Jack. Oh no, don't do that. Okay. Next. All right. What is our game?
So this is our game.
Oh, wait, where's the mic? There it is. We do have a mic.
And is it on? It is on.
It is on.
So what is our game? Our game is a 2.5D side-scrolling action game. The setting of this game, it takes place inside the rotting corpse of a dead god, which you can tell by the trailer. You play as like this bottom-feeder maggot sort of character that can alter its body by, taking bits and pieces from its enemies.
So we're going to show off the build of the game that we prepared for today. And Johnny, our lovely programmer, will be our playtester, and I will be commentating. This should be on this one. Perfect. So this is our start screen. Right now we have the playground, which is just where we were testing everything. The introduction, which is just the intro cutscene that you just saw. Interactable, click on it, goes through. Woo! And then start will lead you to the very first area where we have our tutorial implemented. So there's our player character, as you can see. He can jump, he can walk, he can hit. Our tutorial pops up on the side there. You can use the X key, which is our interact button, to go through it. Basically just going through all the basics. For this area, I just wanted to make sort of like some introductory platforming, get the player used to the movement, get the player used to the environment. These are some of the enemies. These are called skitterers. Basic grub enemy, not tough, take one hit to defeat, easy to defeat. And then that right there is the insectoid mass, where the player would get their first weapon, which is the insectoid hand you saw in the What is Behemoth slide. For the ease of this playtest, we just decided to have the player start with a weapon. And then here is the portals we created that take you between the areas in the stomach. So if you press X near those, you're teleported to the next area. This part shows off our acid pools. So the idea we wanted to go with for each area was we wanted to make basically like an environmental obstacle that you would have to get across. This one is acid. So if you shouldn't touch it, but if you touch it, it would damage you. And that's kind of just, we played around using that asset a lot around the level, just as like more addition to the platforming. The stomach area is kind of really heavy emphasis on just platforming and sort of getting the player used to like moving around this world. That right there is the Galgor enemy, a little flying enemy, dive bombs you, also pretty easy to defeat, but something to just add variety. Here you can see Johnny took the path on the bottom, but there is also a path on the top. So another sort of key component of this area is that each sort of some of the rooms will have like 2 paths, and those will take you to different rooms. Some of them being like sort of like longer lengthwise, some of them maybe being taller. That right there is the Vile Peasant. He's sort of the mid-tier enemy, a bit hard to take down, and does a bit more damage to you. He's the enemy we have that actually leaves behind a corpse right now, which if you eat the corpse, that will increase your little hunger meter on your UI there. That ties into like this whole currency system we were going to do, and it also kind of functions like the power meter for the different weapons you were going to get. So it creates this like interesting dynamic between like, do you save up your food to buy items, or do you use it to use your more powerful weapons? Right here, this is sort of like the big, a wide open space area I was playing with, kind of like an introduction to, this is the area we have right before our mini-boss. This one I kind of wanted to give the players multiple different paths. So there's an upper path with a lot of like the flying enemies I was just talking about, and then there's a lower path that has a lot more grounded enemies, skitterers, peasants. Again, giving player options, you know, whichever one they want to take, and also sort of building on the world that is this giant corpse. And then on the middle there, yeah, you can kind of see the death animation of the Galgor there. That's the exit portal that leads you to the first mini-boss that we implemented, which was the Galgor Elder. So this is an aged-up version of the sort of flying enemies that you were seeing before. Sadly, it was working fine in our editor, but in our build, for some reason, it kind of just sits there. But you can look at the lovely little idle animation he has. Once you kill him, the block on this side will unlock, allowing you to continue further into the level. The final areas of this are just sort of like really heavy emphasis on platforming. So all of them are pretty much just tall, with a player either descending them or ascending them to get to the next portal. And once again, at this point, I give the player sort of 2 choices. They can either go to the portal on the left or the portal on the right, which again takes the player down 2 paths. I think that's good for now. We've showed off pretty much everything we have. Yeah. Wow. All right. So now that we're, yeah. This was the level that we basically just used for testing all the assets we had. That right there is our little shopkeep character. He's the guy you would talk to that you would actually spend the food currency on. There we were testing like the Vile Peasant. Funnily enough, the Vile Peasant actually was basically our test bed for a lot of the things we used on the enemies, including like consuming corpses, AI, that sort of thing. He's called the Peddler. Look at him in his little shirt. That's not, this was just kind of like a funny thing we did for, oh. All right, well, yeah?
So on the topic of the peddler, he was to function as initially our shopkeeper. Then once we realized that our currency system would be insane to add, he became essentially our narrative device. I will say there is another sprite for him that this was made as more of a joke and I think accidentally made its way in. But he does function as basically, like I said, our anchor for a lot of the game's writing.
Yeah, well, you'll see the sprite later. All right, that's everything we have to show in terms of playtesting. So now let's go on to showing off our sprints. I'm going to give this to you for a second while I come back down here. Yeah. Bring up our little, before I forget, yeah, okay. All right, so in terms of development timeline, oh, I have a microphone down here. In terms of development timeline, you know, same as the rest of you. Our first sprint was basically just a lot of concept work, trying to figure out what we wanted the aesthetic of our game to be. A lot of progress got done there. We really like nailed that we wanted this to be like oppressive and disgusting, a little bit of body horror. You can see some lovely concept art made by Amanda, a couple of environmental pieces. The one on the left there is actually the second area that we were going to add. Originally, there were going to be 3 areas in the game, but much like the previous team, we had to cut it due to time constraints. And Jack will talk about the second sprint.
So yeah, in the second sprint is where a lot of the writing got knocked out, because writing you can kind of just cram in one small period of time. It's not super difficult as long as you just put your mind to it and focus on world building and character dialogue and weapon dialogue. So originally we had a bunch of weapon dialogue written up in very Souls-like-esque passages to give you an idea of the world that you're going to be living in and the types of creatures that inhabit it. That system did not fully make its way in, so we repurposed it to sort of use the peddler as a storytelling vessel for the world, which got into the final product. I also worked on cutscene dialogue and worked in tandem with the art teams throughout the entire process to make the world feel as vivid as possible. It's probably our strongest aspect of our game.
We also got a lot of our sprites done in this sprint as well. As you can see, Peter did most of the work on that. Thank you, Peter. Oh, wait, before we go into the third and fourth sprints, Amanda would like to say a few words on the art direction.
So for me, personally, the art direction was something that I had mostly concerned myself with, especially with the, grimy aesthetic of the game. That was something I was, very interested in. So first things first, it is wonderful to have, another artist on my team. It's great to be able to have someone to bounce ideas off of, and it's great to be able to, kind of divide the work so that we can give our all into everything we make. For the first and second sprints, very much we were talking about world building and aesthetics and how we're going to, properly convey the environment that we're trying to kind of show to the player. It involved a lot of research, actually. Sure, a lot of the, nature ended up being a little whimsical and a little bit less, disconnected from human anatomy, but there was still a lot of research involved in, the various, color palettes of a human decomposing, various, stages of death and how that, can infect the environment. Also, the first level was very swamp inspired, so, all of the people involved in concept art and art direction were very much involved in trying to figure out how to mesh these elements together, which was something that took up, in the first couple of weeks. But I'm very glad that we were able to get that hammered out at the beginning, because that really helped make sure that everyone on the team had a very solid idea of what the game is about and the aesthetic we were going for, which helped clear up a lot of communication issues that we would otherwise have had.
So starting from our third sprint for the beta, we put the finishing touches on the writing for the writing document, but most of the third sprint was concerned with, as you can see, asset production, mainly for UI and sort of functional elements like the portals between levels. Previously, they didn't have that wonderful portal texture or sprite that you see there. There was
one time in the Discord server.
Yeah. The levels were being fleshed out here. They were fully blocked out, and then we got a little bit more of the sound design done and some more programming and the issues that come along with it. Leading into our fourth sprint up until now, 1.0, changing the sort of final scope to the game you see now, finishing up a few of the final remaining assets like the opening cutscene that you've seen us present before, smoothing out some of the level design from the block out to the final product that you've seen here, and just overall getting the game ready to be presented here today.
And there you can see how the peddler was actually supposed to look in game. He does not wear a little shirt, I'm sad to say. So, some lessons we learned. We're just gonna go around, and everyone's gonna get a chance to talk about what they wish they could have done and what they didn't get done.
You wanna go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Wait, I have a mic down here.
Well, it's just metaphorical.
So in terms of level design, the wonderful Ben Chang was the one who suggested that I use Maya to block out levels, which worked spectacularly. It really allowed me to just like modularly design levels really quickly. The downside of that is when it actually came to texturing and smoothing the levels, it was a lot more work than I anticipated, because I basically had to go back through all my levels and connect all the blocks that I had been using to construct the levels into like actual congruent pieces. So after that, the textures, they looked a little bit funky. Honestly, I probably should have done another pass and done some more UV work on a lot of them. But we worked with what we had, and I think it came out pretty okay in the end. In terms of the future, you know, I'm pretty sad I didn't get to do the second and third levels. We did have ideas for those. We did have mechanics for those. We did have enemies for those. But, you know, again, time continues on no matter what. So hopefully at some point down the line, we will be able to get those in. And we will be able to get in this sort of like final climactic boss fight that we really wanted to.
I had some important lessons that I learned was definitely, you know, walking based on a minimum viable product. That was something that I, you know, in hindsight, I wish I was able to, you know, push. Kind of, you know, being able to get like the core mechanics down and then like modularly, you know, build off of that, and being able to play test every step of the way was something that in hindsight I really wish our group was able to do. Definitely something that I cannot stress the importance of. And another important lesson I learned was to not overwalk myself. I'm, you know, the 2D environmental artist, but I also, you know, have programming experience, and, you know, I kind of wanted to do a little bit of management, and at first I was wondering, you know, should I do all three of these things? How am I supposed to be, you know, how do I fit myself in with this team? You know, that and creative design. But then I kind of realized that in order to, you know, trust my lovely, lovely team, and to make sure and to just trust them with the job that they have been assigned to, and, you know, because of that trust, I'm more able to, you know, give my all into the, you know, job I was assigned to, which was 2D art. So being able to, you know, divide things up and trust my team members was something that I learned was very important.
So I think our intrinsic issue came from team organization at the very start. Now, while a lot of people have done a lot of fantastic work in tandem, you've seen Amanda's art, you've seen John's level design, you've heard some of Seth's music, et cetera, et cetera. I've personally made about 60 sprite animations for the game, averaging at about 8 to 10 frames each. The problem came with putting it together, as a lot of people have done their assignments in tandem. But when it came time to kind of put it together, we embarked on that a little bit too late, and hence why you see a player which initially had a lot, I'm just going to say a lot of very elaborate animations, it's currently not moving. We realized that the player itself, the way it was set up originally, because we did not communicate on that early enough, just did not mesh well with the sprite tree.
Okay. Thank you so much for listening. We will have our itch.io page up soon, hopefully. Any questions? Oh. Thank you. Yeah.
So I really like that you guys have a world built out where you're able to explore some of the levels and concepts and things you had as a long camp. How do you guys see combat weapons? I know you kind of have it in there, but what is
So definitely a big problem we had was we had a ton of ideas really fleshed out. We just didn't have time to implement them. You didn't see it in the game, but I think in the slide at the beginning, yeah. So as you can see here, the player would actually have like different weapons. These would all have sort of like different combos. We had a strong but slow weapon. We had a fast, quick weapon that relied a lot on like follow-up hits. And these are all written up beautifully by Jack in our writing document. It was just when it came to coding them, and especially getting the like sprite art to work for them in the animations, that's kind of where it fell apart, because again, we just didn't start doing that soon enough. But we do hope, if we do continue with this project, that we can implement, you know, all the bosses, all the weapons, and all these sort of like this intricate combat system with like dashing and climbing. And just a lot of really fleshed out like movement skills. Yes.
So, yeah, you mentioned you had a lot of this kind of front specifically developing and fleshing out the world, and I think that really came through. But I'm curious if in your mind, now that you know sort of what it takes to do that and then what it takes to implement this work, what a different balance you could have struck earlier on would have been to get more of what you wanted in the game there, while still being able to flesh that out as much as you have.
Yeah, so this was not a one-coder project, as you can see. This is not to knock our coder. He did, I think, absolutely phenomenal. I think he went above and beyond. It was that we needed to communicate with the coder, and those of us who had experience coding, myself included, had to communicate with the coder earlier on so that everything actually came together.
To answer your question, I definitely do think that, you know, in hindsight, we wrote a lot of things that didn't end up in the final game. And so I do wish that, you know, as a group, like if we had to redo it, only writing out, you know, the first chunk of things, and then implementing that, and then once that's fully implementing, writing out the next chunk of things. So, you know, we can kind of add on to what we have, so we don't have to, you know, put in a lot of effort making, you know, really interesting sprites and really good writing that ends up ultimately not finding itself into the game, because there's nothing more heartbreaking than that. So ultimately, having a more modular approach is how I would change things if I was able to go back. I think something like that, and you know, playtesting as we go, and you know, breaking it up into smaller chunks, definitely was something that you know would have helped a lot.
Okay. Yes.
You guys talked a little bit about your game being 2.5D. A lot of the gameplay seemed like to me took place in the same plane. So I was wondering if you guys utilized the 2.5D in your game mechanics and why you chose that layout instead of just having it be normal touchpoints.
So that came from an interesting sort of, in our concept phase, we originally wanted to make the game 3D, but when we kind of realized that we didn't have the team members or the skills necessary to do that, we decided, okay, well, what if we sort of tried a combination of both, and that's where the 2.5D came up. I guess, yeah, you didn't really see it in the gameplay, but the player can, in fact, move in and out of the environment. He's not just, like, stuck on one plane, so that's where the...
As can the enemies.
What?
As can the enemies.
Yeah, and the enemies as well. So, in terms of adding that to gameplay, I mean, I feel like originally in the second area that was going to be a lot more prevalent. We were going to be working with like wind, platforming. Instead of like these small areas, it was going to be this one big area. And in some of the level design, I definitely played around with the depth of that. Like some blocks I actually tucked into other blocks, but it didn't cause Z fighting because I just simply crushed them down a little bit. So overall, if we did this again, would we still do 2.5D? Maybe not. Maybe we would have just gone with a 2D perspective, but in the end, I still think it looks kind of cool.
This is more for the artists and narrative designers. What was your guys' biggest inspiration when coming up with everything?
I was going through a Bloodborne phase in January.
I'm actually really happy you asked this because the art direction for me kind of, at first I was very much inspired by, you know, I've always been inspired by, you know, the human body, I guess, and, you know, kind of both the physical and the emotional phases of decomposition. You know, both dealing with death and, you know, slowly decomposing and, you know, meshing those together. Something that I was originally going to, when I was thinking of the art style for this game was, you know, you know, traditional Russian and Czech stop animation. If anyone has ever seen that. You know, this kind of, I definitely was in the beginning thinking about, you know, having a collage of art styles and like, you know, meshing them in a very chaotic but ultimately beautiful kind of way. Obviously did not get in, but you can still see kind of choices of that with me and Peter's art contrasting each other. But definitely a big thing that influenced the art direction for me was the meshing of, you know, the divine metaphorical pieces of the environment versus the more human, gross, you know, anatomical parts of the levels. Walking with like both what would a dead god's body look like is a very interesting question because, you know, gods do not operate on the same rule set as mortals do. So being able to go very, you know, a little whimsical with it and, you know, less bound by logic and being able to push the more like artistic direction was something that I was really, really excited to work on.
Thank you for answering that question.
Yeah, to just finish that up real quick, from narrative point of view, I really enjoy like Melancholia, and like games like Dark Souls 3. A lot of our art inspiration came from Rain World early on, with a sort of damp, depressing look. So to contribute a little last thing to that.
All right, I've been informed we are out of time, so thank you all for listening to us babble on about our game. And we will be getting the itch.io link hopefully on the GSAS Discord.
Style. So let's get right into it.
My name is Avi. I was the narrative designer, one of the sound designers, one of the musicians, and the voice actor.
As one of the world's most wanted criminals, I've always been against the death penalty. Watching this is making me reconsider.
I'm Chang Wei. I do 3D modeling and also the rigging for the characters.
Hi, I'm Mahi. I did level design, marketing, programming, and narrative.
I'm Nix. I worked on the enemy design implementation and some other miscellaneous programming.
Hi, I'm Sean. I worked on the character animation, level design, sound design, programming, project management, as well as the UI art.
Hi, I'm Toby. I'm doing 2D arts, texturing, and concept art.
So what is Freestyle Exile? Well, first of all, it's a skateboarding game and a platforming game with beat-em-up elements.
You play as August Garcia, the daughter of an infamously disgraced assassin. She herself is now an elite assassin in the seedy underworld. Her weapon of choice, the skateboard.
15 years ago, your father was disgraced and tarnished his reputation in the assassin community. You're trying to set things right by competing in a game show run by the man who tore down your father.
So just how do we get to the state we're in? Just a few months ago, this is what our game looked like. Pretty impressive. It's got grinding. Look. Now, of course, this is our current state. A lot has changed, as you can see. So let's talk about the smooth mechanics. So we have your basic platform mechanics. We got moving, jumping, and dashing. But you're on a skateboard. What are you going to do except for grind on rails? Now, unconventionally, of course, that same skateboard can ride on walls, but let's not worry about that. So, talking about some of the beat-em-up mechanics we have a basic 3-hit combo that can be used to attack enemies in your way, as well as your dash and a dash attack coming in later. Both these are both platforming and combat tools. For instance, right now, you can see here a dash attack. And as a quick aside, getting the animation reference for this, well, it was painful. So our last attack is the launcher attack. You don't want to ask how I got the animation reference for that. So basic platforming and combat tool. As you can see here, we got some of the reference for the enemy animations as well. And now we can get into the actual enemies themselves.
So we designed 4 main distinct enemy types for our game. Our first one is these melee grunt enemies. They're light and squishy, but as you can see, they can pretty easily overwhelm and swarm you. Next up, we've got the turret. The turret just shoots a missile that homes in on you, and as you can see, you can redirect the missile to hit the turret itself or maybe a group of other enemies. We also have the drone, which just shoots a simple projectile, predicts where the player is going. Pretty basic. And finally, we have the mortar enemy. Bad name, should be grenadier or something, but it just shoots an explosive projectile in an arc and gives you a warning where the projectile is going to land. Each enemy has a health bar above them that indicates their current status. When the health bar turns orange, that indicates the enemy is ready to attack. And when it flashes yellow, the attack executes.
So just a little bit of basic damage beat-em-up elements. We have our standard damage pop-ups that come up when you attack an enemy. This just helps you to quantify how much damage you've actually done.
So you are participating on a game show, and the host of the game show happens to be the villain of the game. So we wanted to implement a system by which we could flesh out this villain's character. And for that, we created a voice line system, where every time you take damage, depending on the level of damage you take, the host of the show, Barry Bodies or Barry Bodeas, will, input his own opinion on how bad you are at the game. And currently, in the demo you're going to see, we have 49 individual voice lines, but in the game as a whole, in the files that have yet been implemented, we have 60.
As one of the world's most wanted criminals, I've always been against the death penalty. Watching this is making me
Yeah, so in the beta, we had our level design consisted of platforming section, combat section, platforming section, combat section. However, when we were doing playtests, we found that players didn't really like that because they like moving, and when they went into a combat section, they would just stop their movement and fight, and this was very unsatisfying for some people. So we instead decided to make it more platforming centered, and then we were supposed to use essentially enemies as obstacles, similar to Mario. Now we have more safe areas, and you always have multiple ways to get to the next checkpoint. Also, in every stage, there are 3 collectibles, and we are also working on a system that will play a voice clip that will show more of the story with each collectible. Also, in every level, we could have alternative harder paths. So for example, if you go to the left, that is a lot easier, but it takes longer. But if you go over here, it is a lot faster, but harder. As well, we have a score system, and that score system encourages players to get as much combat as possible and to beat the game as fast as possible. And the game ends when you reach a certain point in the map. And these are just some screenshots of the level. Look at how beautiful they are. Oh my gosh, right? They're so pretty. Also, we had some community engagement. So we've been working on marketing a lot, and without telling anyone to, we've had 2 videos posted about our game, which is insane, and it's really cool. And also, we're doing Game Fest on Saturday, so you should totally come. There's also some other cool games, and yeah.
So for the future, something we want to do is implement the collectibles. There are currently 9 collectibles, as we have a 3-level plan. All those collectibles are recorded and written, but we didn't have time to implement them in the game. We also want to add more voice lines, really flesh out the characters more. The collectibles will also help with that.
We also would like to continue development over the summer. We want to get 3 levels out, and we want to continue to flesh out our mechanics that we have. We're going to continue building our sales funnel. Now that we have a demo out that is very polished, we can market based on that. We currently have avenues on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Discord, and we have an itch page. Currently, we're making a Steam page. This is what it looks like. It was approved by Steam, but I don't think it's up yet because, I don't know, it takes time. We are going to try to get more community engagement, probably through Discord, maybe by having certain challenges or something, and we're going to probably communicate with influencers such as YouTubers or TikTok stars.
There are some art assets is still in progress right now. This is the model for our final boss, Barry. We want to make it to heavy exoskeleton style, and with some very heavy attacks which will be demonstrated later. And the rigging texture is still in progress, and I think they will be implemented soon.
Yeah, and we're also going to implement more levels. You can see there's a conceptual level design. And we're also going to implement more environmental modeling stuff. And yeah, there's some textures for gravity texture we are going to implement.
And just as a sneak peek at some of our boss fight mechanics, we have our basic large-scale melee attack, as well as a kind of a burst mechanic for those fighting game fans, just so you don't combo Barry to oblivion. All right.
Also, if you want to play the demo, it's on our Discord server, so you should totally join. This will be, during our question time, it'll be up, so you can join after that, but yeah. So, too slow. Ooh, you'll get it later.
for a playtest. Yep. Let's see, podium mic. Is this on? Yes, it is. All right, so I'm just going to take you to a basic run through the mechanics, and then we'll actually see what a really fast playthrough of the game looks like. I'm not going to show off the fun Easter egg we have in the menu. Sorry about that, Chris. But we have the rebind menu as well. And that doesn't work. Let's go back. So let's just get right into it.
Welcome, denizens of the underworld, to Season 3 of the Berry Bodies Show. The contestant of this season is August Garcia, daughter of the infamously inept Nuriel Garcia. And this season, our contestant will have to struggle to even get to her targets, as the environment is the newest enemy. Will she have what it takes? Probably not, but let's find out. Let the killing commence.
So as you can see here, we have a basic platforming section. We get to that really quickly. Just jumping around. This section, of course, is supposed to teach the player how to dash while jumping. Otherwise, they land back down here. So as you can see here, if you jump and dash, you get across, follow the wall section, and of course, we get the player to grind. And one key feature we want during level development is to make sure that player always has an option, even if they failed. Let's say they failed this wall run here. Oh hey, another section. So let's go through that real quick.
Congratulations! You didn't die to gravity.
So we have a small section here where enemies will try to beat you up as you get
now
through.
You have to face our newest
get
lineup
by either fighting them or just avoiding them entirely.
And unlike gravity,
just like in Mario.
These guys have guns.
But enough of that. You want to see a fast-paced play of the game, don't you? Let's restart this. Of course, cutscenes, always skippable. All right. I'm using some of the mechanics that we have here, such as dash canceling into a launcher. This allows you to get an immense amount of speed really quickly. Of course, this, during normal playtesting, would just be found out through continuous play.
You know, we had an entire fight prepared for you that you skipped. That's extremely rude, August. I think we have to kill you in retribution.
As you can tell there, that there was a shortcut. Little section that we were talking about earlier. Most players might not know how to get through this, but super dash. And we're nearing the end of our level here. And here we are. So that was pretty fast paced, not my best record, but as you can see here, we get to about minute 30 is about the cutoff for an SSS ranking. Any lower than that, you get S, D, S, then A, B, C, D, and then it goes straight to A. All right, that's pretty much us for a demo. Let me skip right to that slide.
Yeah, be sure to join if you want to play the demo. It's on the link.
All right, any questions?
Let me know when you guys get the Steam page approved by the social stack. I don't know, I'm interested to see what you guys have planned in the future, so I really hope you continue working on it. You guys have awesome movement mechanics, you get really good pace, really just overall, really cheating. I wonder if you looked at Rollerdrome for any inspiration.
We saw that halfway through development, and I did see it, but the main thing that I did not want to take away from that is gunplay. Gunplay really kind of separates that whole, it makes a whole divide between movement and the actual combat itself. Because if you have it ranged, then all of a sudden the movement is just an avoidance tool. It's not your way to actually do the combat. I'm glad you asked. There actually is that feature. We didn't really see it because we did a speed run test through the actual combat, but in the top right corner during combat sections, there is a combo meter that goes from, once again, I believe it goes from D all the way to SSS, depending on how fast you can trick your combos together. Right now, there are only 3 different types of attacks, but in the future, we, of course, would like to have more of a combo tree.
Were there any specific considerations throughout the process that you made for optimization strategies?
Optimization in runtime or optimization in the actual level?
Like in your build, like frame rate,
Oh.
with your switch mechanics and things like that?
Yeah, so we have chunking. Do we have level of detail? Did we add that yet? No. Okay, we don't have level of detail. We probably want to add that eventually. We have chunking, so things load in chunks.
We spent a bit of time looking through the profiler, seeing what we can optimize. One of the early things that was a big optimization was our enemy AI. We realized we're calling it way too often, and it was really easy to just turn down how often it updates. That saved a lot of performance on CPU time.
And speaking on chunking, it works basically in the Minecraft system, close to it really. It doesn't really check a radial, but rather just a cone in front of you. So it makes sure whatever is in front of you will always render, but everything behind you doesn't exist anymore.
Basically avoid all the enemies, correct?
Yes.
If you want to. So is there any actual benefit to engaging in combat?
Yes, because if you fall down or get damaged by the enemies at all, the bonuses you saw at the end will no longer be enough to actually get your score up to an SSS. If you don't engage in combat whatsoever but don't get those 2 bonuses, you get no points whatsoever.
So killing enemies does in fact impact the score?
Yes. Oh, I see a question in the back.
So I noticed you guys made a lot of use of it seemed like shaders and stuff over texturing to get detail and visual style. I was wondering, first, what sort of inspirations did you look to for that, and how did you go about implementing them?
Well, our biggest inspiration is quite obvious, Jet Set Radio, great game. So that inspired a lot of the actual art style itself. Now, in terms of the implementation, we went the lazy route and not the actual route of making a shader for it. We just made an inverted hull in Blender and gave it the darkest material possible.
I noticed a couple things that I think are pretty often overlooked, especially in smaller projects. There's one is just the feedback in general, the camera shake, motion, stuff like that, numbers, also great. Also, it seems like the camera was really smooth, which is really important for third-person games. So pretty often, so that was great. But I'm also just really curious how you design and make the settings kind of.
Yeah, so when we first came up with the concept for this game, like the original pitch of this game was literally just skateboarding combat. And from there, we, at least me in particular, I really wanted to have the whole team involved. So we had a few different ideas. One was cyberpunk, one was the modern assassin aesthetic that it turned into. And then one was like a gritty, like 70s, classic skateboarding. And once we decided upon the more modern aesthetic, I think it was Mahi that eventually came upon the idea of a game show. And from there, that to me really sparked my interest and passion, and we just kind of ran with it.
And if you want to hear the really funny origin of the idea itself,
it was literally a dream. It's really funny because after telling it to a few people, someone told me, hey, that sounds like Jet Set Radio. And I looked up Jet Set Radio and I realized I remade Jet Set Radio in my dream without ever seeing it.
Any other questions?
What was the reference to the launcher animation that you told us not to ask you about?
So I tried doing it. I just looked at pole vaulters.
other questions?
I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, so we are Team Code Armor, and this is our team.
Hi, I'm Deng Haliu. I'm the 3D artist and a level designer.
I'm Shi Chao, I'm the programmer.
I'm Rita, I'm a 3D artist.
So, what is Code Armor? The Code Armor is an PvP top-down shooting game. Players wake up in a dark underground mystery lab. The only thing they have to do is to escape. Escape is possible to every players, but some players are destined to be left in the lab. If I'm going to put some text for our game, the first tag will be the vision. So seeing is not believing in our game. For example, you can look at this image. We implement the fog of war in our game, so the players can only see other players when they are in front of them. And the second tag will be the resource management. In the underground lab, there will be some mystical energy that allow players to collect. And players can use those energy to buy weapons or armors, but all of them are expensive, so they have to spend the energy wisely. And the last tag will be the teaming up. So in our game, players can team up with other players. Just spinning around can show you're friendly, but the commitment of team up is not hard. So so your teammate can still do damage to you, so you have to take care of that. So how a single game works? First, when the game begins, so the players will get to the lab and have to collect the energy to strengthen themselves, and then they have to wait for the exit point to open. And after the exit point is open, they have to go to that point and interact with it and try to escape. So how to be stronger in our game? First, there's some free energy on the ground so players can collect them. And the second way is to kill other players. So if you kill somebody, their energy and equipment will be on the ground. You can pick it up and recycle the equipment. And after that, you have your energy, so you can buy something on your portal shop. And the second way is to go to the crafter in the ground, which can build powerful armor and weapons. The last thing will be team up with other players, which is the best way to do. So the way to win this game is to wait until the exit point is open, and then open the exit point with interacting, and then wait in the point to go. So there's three specialty of our exit point. So the first one will be the exit point allows certain numbers of players to escape, which encourage players to work together. And the second point is the exit point is time limit. So the players have to get to the point as fast as possible. Yep, that's our exit point. And still, the players can be attacked on the exit point.
Yeah, and for the most important part of a multiplayer game, it is the multiplayer connection. So in our game, we have two modes. The first one is the online match, which you can play with other online players in real time. And then another mode is the free play, which you can create your own room and send the IP and port number to your friends. Then you can play with your friends together. And how the networking work actually. So for the online match mode, it starts from the client side send a request to start the game, and the server will receive the request. Once there are enough players to start the game, in our game this is 6 now, it will start the server and send the IP port back to all the players in the queue, and then the game will start. And for the free play mode, it's more simple. It's just the owner of the room start the game, and then server will just automatically start the server and send it back. Then you will see the IP and port number on the screen. Then you can send it to your friends. And for the data communication in the multiplayer game, it's just use the server RPC and the client RPC provided by Unity. So the server RPC is the function that calls on the client side but runs on the server side. For example, the movement and rotation, the firing request, and so on. And the client RPC is reverse, like it calls on the server side but runs on the client side, like the damage check and the status update, something like this. An example of the combination of both the server RPC and the client RPC is on your client side, you send a request to shoot, and it will create a bullet on the server side, and the server will check the collision of the bullet and the character. So once it detects damage made by this bullet, it will calculate the health of this character and send it to all the players. So everybody have the same update, and they know the same thing of what the game is going on. And here is a video of our game. Because it's a multiplayer, we cannot play in real time, so we have recorded video. So this is at the start of the game. The players spawn in the same position, and now they are going to find the energy and make weapons. So while you are making weapons or equipment, you can still pick up energy, but you cannot fire, and you're moving at a relatively slower speed. And this is a situation that the player under control found the players fighting together, and they are using the different weapons. And you can only see the bullet if they are in your vision. And this is and that's a solution that indicates the player lose. And this is used in crafter. When you are using a crafter trying to create some stronger weapons or armors, you should wait there. So this is a chance for other players to find you and kill you. And there is the item created. And you cannot see the bullet if it is not in your vision, but you can still see the firing animation indicate that there is a fire there. And here is the exit. And if you leave the exit, it will restart the counting. And here is a player there. And that's a winning situation. Okay, so that's the end of the video.
So what we learned in this project is, first thing is a workflow of our art. So in our game, the players can wear different equipment on the body. For example, like the head and a bullet and armor for the body, which is a difficult process to make because we have no experience in rigging and that sort of stuff. So we work on that process for a month to make everything work just correct. And the second thing will be, it's pretty hard to design a multiplayer game. And the first thing is, it's hard to add new design. For example, we are thinking about sending an emoji system in the game, but it's quite hard to design after everything is settled down. And the second point is, it's quite difficult to playtest our game because we have to find 6 players and playtest it. But playtest is quite important in designing, so it's quite hard to do the multiplayer.
Yeah, in addition to this point, when you want to create a multiplayer game, it should be decided at the very beginning of the design process of the game because it's very hard to change all the functions. If it is at the very beginning a single player mode, if you want to change it to multiplayer, it's very hard and because you need to be clear what to be on the server side and what to be on the client side because that's the very, very basic step of the multiplayer games. Okay, so I think that's the end of our presentation. And any questions? Yeah, any questions?
Come on.
I think, okay, yeah.
I really like the concept for guys' game. What do you guys think would be two ways to introduce players who are starting out to the early classes or onboarding players to the game?
So we're trying to add a tutorial for new players, but we don't have time for that. In future project design, we might try to add a tutorial scene for them to train.
How do you see that?
What do you mean?
I guess, what do you think is important to teach the player how to
The first thing to teach players is the basic movement, that's for sure, and shooting. And the second thing is like maybe how to show you're friendly, like seeing other players don't fire, this sort of stuff, to do a teamwork stuff.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah, we can see.
I really love this game. I want to ask, so I noticed that there's like a lot of like darkness is used in the game design. I wanted to know how that affected how you developed the design.
Yeah, that's first on the level. There's actually a black mask on the on between the player and the camera. So beside that black mask, we still have a directional light rendering the level. So everything looks normal when the player has the vision, but it looks dark when players can see.
So how to be more like explain how it works? It's like all the objects that require the vision to see have different layers, and only those on these layers will cut the mask that he mentioned that provide the darkness. So once you see it in your view, it will cut the mask so you can see the object. So the like other objects like the walls or the some other like chairs and stuff, they will be always there. So that doesn't influence the mask. So that's basically how it works, and that's made by Brent Zhang. Yeah. Any other questions? If no questions, I think, yeah.
So, I'm actually curious more about the teaming up aspect of the design, and we could say a little bit more about how that is advantageous. Because in the demo, it seems what would happen is somebody would get to the end goal and somebody would snipe them and kill them all, right? So, what is it that makes teaming up actually a better strategy?
Yeah. So, he mentioned in the design process of our presentation, each exit have a particular limitation of players. So, for example, if a particular exit have allow players of 2 to exit. So, if you are teaming with other players, you can kill all the single players that during the process you find. So, but once you get there, you still don't know how many players have been exit from the exit. So once you and your teammates are, go to the exit, then it's the part to be like you are not a teammate anymore. But before this, it is very advantage to teaming up because it can help you to clear other players that before you reach the exit. Yeah, is this answer the question? Yeah. Yeah.
So, for future development, if you were to guys to continue working on the game, would you consider creating different environments with different layouts, or like maybe it's like randomly chosen for when you open up a server, or were you thinking of making an environment variation? I suppose is the question.
So the environmental variation, right? Yeah, we are trying to, if we have time, we're trying to implement, like for example, a roguelike map, changing, like randomly generate different room in different places that allowed the map for variation. And we are, if we have more time, we are trying to do like some rigid body object, like door and that sort of stuff, randomly placed in the map, allowed player to interact with them. Is that answer your question?
Yeah, and also if you can make different maps, it can be randomly selected maps at the beginning once you create the game. If you play in online match mode, and if you're in free play mode, you can choose the map like this. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so I think we are fine. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our game, Bottled Up. I'm Bella.
I'm Alexi.
I'm Chris. I'm Brent.
I'm Ibrahim.
And I'm Anshi.
So, our game, Bottled Up, is a 2.5D beat-em-up in which we're playing as Ran Munehara, a magical girl going through her daily routine of helping people through their troubles by literally fighting their inner demons.
So, first, let's talk about those 3 C's. First of all, we know our character is Ran, and she's a magical girl. Next up, we have our wonderful controller image. You can see that the player has 3 different attacks that they can use, as well as a dash. They move with the left stick. They use the left trigger to build a rev, which we'll go over later, and the right trigger to do parry and block. Then, on the other side, we have the camera. It is a 2.5D camera with 2D assets in a 3D world. Next slide. And now we're going to go over gameplay so you can see what's going on here. So, there are 3 different attacks that you can use, as said earlier, light, medium, heavy. Each of these attacks has different advantages and disadvantages. The light attack is very fast, has low startup, but it does the least damage. Heavy attack, more range, more damage, but big startup. You can chain these together with light, medium, heavy, or you can do reverse beat, heavy, medium, light. Yeah, next slide, please.
So as mentioned earlier, we have a system called Rev. Essentially, it's a gauge that you can build by pressing trigger, and it'll slowly decrease over time. And whenever you have a certain amount of Rev and you do an attack, it will double the amount of damage you do.
So this is our main character, Ran Munehara. She is both a high school girl and a magical girl, and what she does is she battles people's physical manifestations of their inner demons, as Chris said, with sick yo-yo tricks. And she gives herself purpose by helping others. Next slide, please. And here is our first level. It is called Aoi Stress, and this is the first character that Ran encounters. Her name is Aoi. She's Ran's classmate and an honors student. Her inner demon is stress because she feels that she's constantly under pressure to do well in school from both herself, her family, and her peers.
So the first level, which takes place in the school, it's overall pretty empty, and there's not that many enemies, and we also don't use any hazards here. Essentially, we want the player to get used to the movement and combat. And then the first... The first type of enemy will approach the player, and as it gets close enough, it'll charge for a bit before just dashing at you and doing an attack.
So this is our second level. It's titled Watanabe's Burnout. In this level, Ron encounters Watanabe, who is a coworker and friend of her mom's. The inner demon, he's a salaryman who works a typical 9-to-5 job, and his inner demon is burnout because he's been working such a monotonous job. He lost a lot of passion for what he does.
And this level takes place in the grocery store. We start introducing hazards. So in the background, there's the fire bar, which deals damage to both the enemies and the player. And the enemy is the burnout enemy, which is pretty similar to the stress enemy, except that it also can predict the player's movement.
And this is our final level. It's titled Sakura's Burden. Next slide, please. And in this level, we encounter Sakura. She is Ron's best friend. And one of the pivotal points of her story is that she's being bullied. So her inner demon is burden, or feeling like a burden. This is because she's internalized that Ron is too busy for her. So in turn, she never wants to burden or over rely on her friend by telling her problems.
So we're back in the school, but this is now we're not going back to basics. It's a culmination of everything is the player experience throughout the game so far, being the last level. We also introduced the burden enemy and the turret hazard, which both shoot out a little bullet that will slow down the player when hit, causing combat encounters to be a lot more difficult. So a player has to really culminate all their skills together in order to be able to help to tackle Sakura's final problem. So we have a little gameplay demo for you, since it would be a lot easier and more time.
Sister over. Ran, it's good to see you again. How's your mom doing? Mom's fine. I'm actually running an errand for her right now. That's good to hear. Watanabe smiles slightly, softening the deep wrinkles that mars his otherwise young appearance. Ran can't help but notice the heavy eye bags that sit underneath his eyes. Tell her I said hello and congratulations on the promotion.
Voice acting not included.
How about you, though? How are you doing, Mr. Watanabe?
You did a good job. Don't worry.
Watanabe chuckles, but it's heavy and hollow. His shoulders sag as if he holds the weight of the world. I'm alright, all things considered. Work has been busy. It's nothing out of the ordinary. He places the curry back on the shelf and tosses the shrimp ramen into his basket. There's a small, rueful expression on his face. I appreciate the concern, but I'm just a little tired. It'll pass soon. Ran remains unconvinced, but Watanabe doesn't look like he wants to be pressed on the topic further. Oh, okay. Hopefully things get better soon. Thank you, Ran. Well, I should be heading back to the office now. There's still lots of paperwork to finish. Ran's jaw drops at the revelation. You're going back this late? Even my mom's heading back home soon. Watanabe doesn't humor her with a response. Instead, he gives her a tired smile before bidding her farewell and turning away. As Watanabe rounds the end of the aisle, Ran catches a glimpse of the same murky dark sludge that previously tainted Aoi. It's that tar stuff again. I've been seeing it a lot these days. I need to take care of it for Mr. Watanabe's sake. She drops her basket off to the side, unclipping a familiar yo-yo from her backpack before she takes off after Watanabe. Got the gameplay now. Gotta watch out for these enemies. They use a to get towards you. Let's try beating them up. But, we got hit too. Alright. Run away, charge some rev meter. Boom. Take them out. Alright. Looking good, looking good. Maybe we can time a heavy attack. Perfect. One hit KO. Alright. Doing okay. Uh-oh. Oh, crud. Alright. Let's keep going. Dodge the attack. Boom, bam. Do fast attacks, one after the other. What's this guy up? Oh, I got hit by the fire. Damn. Ooh. Alright. Gotta watch out with the tap. And charge some rev meter first. Big attack right there. Looks like the enemies can get hurt by the fire bar too. Alright, just take them out before they can hurt me. Damn, I'm running low on health. Alrighty. Come on. Perfect. Once Ran finally catches up with Watanabe, he turns around with confusion written on his face. Ran, what are you doing here? Mr. Watanabe, you work seriously can't call you back at this time. His expression hardens and the faintest traces of a frown tug at the corner of his mouth. He stares down at Ran in slight disapproval. That's not my decision to make, Ran. Yeah, but look at you, you're practically a zombie. No offense. Are you sure no one else can help you? I can try asking my mom. Watanabe sighs wearily. That won't be necessary. I appreciate you looking out for my health, Ran, but as an adult I have responsibilities I can't abandon. You'll understand someday. But, Ran, I get what you're trying to do. I'm also grateful that your mom has helped me out so much in the past. However, work isn't always meant to be fun. Sometimes it's a mean to an end. Ran quiets down her protests. Somehow the threat of the looming creature over her head looks more grim than ever. Still, it's unfair. Watanabe is one of the most dedicated people she knows, right after her mom, and he's being worked to the bone. He's used to find...
That's the end of the gameplay demonstration.
Mr. Watanabe, it's been...
Okay, so our game has come a long way since the very beginning. So originally we wanted to have a lot more like NPCs and side quests and multiple level locations, but we have now like significantly downsized that to be like a linear location and like a linear story. And also we only have like 2 levels. We also wanted to have like multiple attacks, but you know we only but then we decided to just to have it be the light, medium, and heavy. And then also, since it's a 2.5 perspective, we're going to go with multi-directional sprites for Ran, but that was too much work, so we just stuck with the side sprites.
So we originally had a bigger overarching narrative, but our final game build, we shrank it a little bit. There was originally going to be another level where it takes place at the park, and Ran encounters Sugiyama, whose inner demon is like feelings of isolation, feelings of loneliness. And then there was also meant to be a final like boss level where Ran encounters her own inner demons as the resolution for the story.
So let's go over how programming changed throughout the course of the project. So initially, in order to do hitboxes, we would use Unity prefabs, which are basically just objects that you can summon from wherever. And this kind of worked initially, but it wasn't really the best solution. So we ran into a lot of problems with this. Mainly scalability and accuracy. The prefabs were tied to player animation, so if the player stopped doing their animation, then what happens to those prefabs and hitboxes? Also with scalability, it was possible to make different moves with this version, but it was more difficult to. So to fix that, we added scriptable objects instead by pulling from scriptable objects and doing casting, a box cast, instead of doing collider checks with prefabs that you summon and unsummon. We use scriptable objects, and that worked out much better. We also used timers instead of making it built into the animation, so that way we could monitor what frame the player's on and what they should be doing at the time, and it makes it much easier to activate and deactivate everything. And finally, we use class inheritance. We had enemies and players go from the same class character. They inherited from that, and so it became much easier to do things like the character getting hurt, and we didn't have to reprogram that for everything else. So, and that's how we got it to make it look like this, instead of the little bit of trouble we had before.
So there was a little bit of talking, but eventually we decided for the enemy spawning, we would do a more like manual way of creating the waves, in that all of the wave patterns would be set, and all the spawn locations would also be manually like set as a scriptable object. So so every time the enemies would spawn in the same patterns, and each wave there's a total of 3 waves, and then each wave can be broken up into like mini waves. So for example, if one wave has like 5 to 6 enemies, you don't really want 5 to 6 enemies just like all on the player at once. So like it can be broken up into like 3 and 2. And once each mini wave is cleared, it spawns the next one, and then once all mini waves are spawned, the wave goes on until all 3 waves are done.
All right, talking about a little bit about the development of art over the course of the game. Originally, we come to this with a very different background. So myself doing 3D art, Bella doing some 2D. We decided what's the best way to combine those? 2.5D, baby! Ooh, isn't that great? Isn't that such a good idea? You get so much solutions, you get so much portfolio work. No. See, you got a lot of the cool stuff, like 2.5D games are cool and all, but like, hey, now you have problems with both mediums, like rigging and multiple directional sprites, and it was very nice for like trying to align attacks and stuff. But ultimately, it wasn't worth the headache. With the new system, taking inspiration from Cult of the Lamb, how they do that is by having only the side sprites, but having an arc for the attacks. Each of the attacks hitboxes are vary as well, so you still need to have mirrors on how you're going to be able to approach enemies.
And then just continuing on with like some of the issues with like 2D, you have to like draw a lot of frames. So basically, like what I took out of it is that it's okay to like reuse or like recycle some of your old drawings that you've done. And also another thing, like that was an issue on my end, was that I kept trying to animate on 2s when I could like do varying frame rates. I don't know why. I thought that doing 2s would be professional, but guys, you can have different kinds of frame rate. That's crazy. Wow. Also, smears are your best friend.
So, what else did we learn? What are we going to take away from this? The first thing is workflow and scope. We had deadlines that we needed to meet. We made goals for those deadlines. When we failed to meet those goals, we said, okay, we'll get it done for the next one. But then it repeated over and over again. What we most likely should have done was scope down. If we can't meet the goals, then we change the goals rather than doing the other version of that. Oh, yeah.
And then just also adding on to that, another thing that kind of like blew our scope out of proportion was the fact that we were coming in being like, hey, it's GD2, we got so much time, and we didn't. So that was just like another factor with, the scope.
Speaking of GD2, we came into this with a lot of passion, a lot of ideas. We each have our own pitches coming in, but since no one else is really passionate besides the presenter, we decided to make this game based on like all our collective interests. The problem with this, though, is it's mitigated passion, and accommodating everyone didn't accommodated nobody, because we had all conflicting ideas and visions of the game, and they weren't exactly put on paper to the fullest extent.
So, in conclusion, we shook the soda. It fizzed up a little bit, maybe a bit more than we expected, but in the end, we got to taste new flavors we could have never imagined before, and that's an experience we could definitely take away and use in either this project, we want to continue it, or future projects. And then, thank you, that's it. So the question is, what's that dog in the corner? And I'm not really sure. I don't really know how that got there. We never put that in, so I don't really know. Yeah, we're gonna say to move on to the next question. Security. Yes.
Was there ever a live demo ready?
We could do a live demo right now if we really wanted to. We just thought that pre-recorded would be better because we were under the impression that the time was going to be very strict, and literally everyone just pre-recorded. E3, Game Awards, it's just more efficient. If you really wanted to, we have a build right now and we could do it, but yeah, it's just for time and stuff. Anybody else?
Hey. So I was already curious about, I guess, the relationship between the premise and the gameplay and how those each evolve with the project. And then you also mentioned that you came in with very different interests. I'm curious about how those sort of interplay with each other and you ended up with the one you have at the end.
So kind of like, I think definitely Chris here, he had like a really good vision in terms of like making like a rhythm game. I mean, yeah, you can, but like you could talk about it in a sec. But basically, like there's a lot of like solid ideas and aesthetics that went in there, and that kind of crossed over into our game. And I also wanted to do something very narrative driven, and also to like, so I was like kind of like pointing out to like Alexi of like, hey, let's write a narrative. So that also is very strong in our game. If you want to talk a little bit more about what your pitch is.
Okay, sure. It's not this. Yeah, I mean, basic thing. Imagine Freestyle Exile, but it's a rhythm game. Literally, it just kind of happened, okay? Yeah. But yeah, then we also had, Brent had a few different ideas, but I'm gonna talk about the, I want to talk about the second part of your question is the relationship between the narrative and the gameplay. So initially, it was dreamt up as sort of, I guess, Persona-esque, in that you'd have like the overworld and you traverse this map, and you'd like go and you do the Persona thing. I have not played Persona, and like go into people's inner psyches. The narrative was a very strong core of our game from the beginning, and it was probably the part that was maintained best throughout the evolution. It's like okay, we gotta. I know we keep moving the goalposts, but we still got to scope down a bit. So like linear story, visual novel cutscenes, the writing's still really good. Don't worry about that. And then it also kind of became a thing of like, again with that, I guess, Persona. No, should get on hindsight. More action adventure-y to like a beat 'em up hack and slash. It was like, oh hey, frame dead is a thing, and that was real. It gave us a lot of trouble.
To make a long story short, we wanted narrative, we wanted combat, so we decided to make a narrative combat game. Any other questions? You.
I like 2.5D games can sometimes be tricky, especially if there's a lot of melee action. So I'm wondering what you guys did, or if there's anything that you guys think you could be doing better to help the player identify that perception.
Ooh, I can take let's do this.
Okay, yeah, so it was brought up to us at the very beginning. We were like, hey, 2.5D with combat works kind of okay in that you have, but the main problem is being, your sprite is flat. You don't have any depth perception. So what I envisioned was doing 3D attacks. You can see, actually this is earlier. Let me go to the gameplay actually.
Mr. Watt.
Brent, I love your voice acting, but I gotta get to my point. Yeah, I did. A lot of narrative. Please click. Why is it not clicking? All right, there you go. So it's best seen on the enemies since they have very exaggerated motions and rule of 3, 8-frame animations. Basically, yeah, so it spawns in a 3D object. That 3D object has a lot more depth, even though they have a shader applied to them to make them look more flat. You get just a lot more, and then, yeah, it has a lot more depth, and then the hitboxes are made accordingly. And then the circle shadows is always a very easy consideration to make for these types of games in which you're showing like, hey, this is what the player ostensibly takes up.
Yeah, it's also important to have shadows, giving the camera a little bit of an angled tilt so you can get where you are in the 3D space. Any other questions? Mr. in the front.
So one of the things we've been talking about all semester is building these systems to enable you to then build more content. And from my perspective, it's always been this kind of trade-off, balance. Is that effort and time going to pay off by the end, or does it take so long to build the systems that you start running out of time? What I'm really interested in is because there's a bunch of this content in here that wasn't in this game last time I saw it, a week ago. There's attacks and there's enemies, and there's a lot more stuff that is very suddenly appeared right at the end. So did that pay off?
Yes, I think it did pay off. Our initial problem in the beginning was that it wasn't scalable. So when I was talking about the prefabs before, it was scalable, it wasn't as scalable. But adding the player class, for example, we have in our final build, we have 3 different types of enemies, and they became way easier to build once all players and enemies inherited from a common character script so they could get the same behaviors. Probably something we should have figured out earlier to do, but now we know to make things more scalable. Same thing for the scriptable objects rather than the prefabs. It just becomes way easier to do. It did take a while, yes. There wasn't the best documentation for it either, but I think you can see the results and they show themselves.
talking a bit on the art side of that, it was a lot of us waiting around for those systems to be implemented, but once they were and we understood, at least I understood them well enough, making the base that it was easy. All the visual novel sprites, for example, one base sprite just transforms slightly, fix up the line art, faces are just changed out, you're good to go. With animations, especially the yo-yo, it was a matter of just getting those animations into Blender and then have them follow animation arcs or have them be on a constant frame rate so they have like the same 12 to 8 FPS as the animations. And that worked out really well, honestly, in my opinion at least. A big problem for me near the beta was trying to get the look down. And so oh, hey, shaders, why do you have a separate language, my guy? So that was fun to try to figure out for a bit. Once I did have that, I could just drag and drop them and just assign a color, and they're good to go. I don't have to worry about texturing, and it's pretty great.
And then one final quick thing I want to go over is the genre we picked was probably definitely not the genre to go for if you're limited on time. There's a lot that goes into a fighting game or a beat 'em up in general. The hit stop, the hit stun, showing proper camera shaking, all of that had to be done, and it needed to be good, or else it's really not like a game. I think we pulled it off, but it was a lot that we had to do.
Any other questions?
Yes, anything else?
I feel like the aesthetic of this has also been evolving over the course of the semester, and it's got a really interesting place between the kind of like old school expressive fluidity in the animations, and then Brent, your voiceover. It has this kind of like 1930s era like radio drama feel to it. That also kind of fits with this like old school animation feel. So there's like a certain kind of time period starting to break out of this, which is really interesting.
Initially, when I recorded the voiceover for Watanabe, he sounded more like SpongeBob when he had no water. But then when I listened back to it, it was grating to listen to, so I changed it to old-timey.
Yeah, as mentioned before by Bella, I always had a particular aesthetic I wanted to go for with this semester. When I pick an aesthetic, I very much do commit to the bit, as you can see. That old PSX style era of like really shitty voice acting and really like wild, wacky, experimental visuals is something I really enjoy, and I'm glad I was able to experiment with it in this semester. Any other questions? We're good? All right. All right, thank you so much for your time. Better on this, where it's animation references.
Good evening, everyone. We are the developers behind the game Zuku, a stealth game where you play as a chicken.
I'm Anton. I'm the level designer and sole composer for our game.
I am Jay, the main programmer for the game.
I'm Cam. I'm the 3D modeler and rigger and animator.
I'm James. I'm the sound designer.
And I'm Lakota. I am the narrative and UI artist.
So, what is Zuku? Zuku is a stealth game where you play as a chicken in a highly secure prison laboratory containing mythical animals with extraordinary supernatural abilities. You are approached by Phoenix named Cinder, and he has tasked you, the quest, to free all the animals, including a few of his allies who will aid you in the breakout. Now, if you can reach those animals past all the heavily armed guards and security, they will hear out on your plan. But furthermore, they will endow you with the gift of their power, which can help you get through the facility to find the rest of the allies and walk through that door and liberate them all.
So building off of that, basically in the game, you're fighting against ARC, which is the Animal Recovery Kingdom. Pretty much, they are an organization who is supposed to rescue animals after they have been misplaced from their homes and then place them elsewhere. However, what the people of the world don't realize is ARC does recover these animals, but instead they take them back to their lab where they experiment on them in hopes of recovering their powers to use for their own agenda. And so in the game, Cinder, the Phoenix, and his allies are the latest victims. So unfortunately, in their quest to take Cinder's power, they end up killing him, but it's okay because he is the Phoenix. He has the power of rebirth. So in the game, he is reborn as the voice inside Ben the chicken's head, and together they must make their way around the area, freeing their friends and hopefully stopping ARC once and for all.
So without further ado, let's see the game. I'm not going to read it because it goes automatically, but basically in the cutscene, it just details what I just said. Pretty much, he introduces himself as Cinder, and he basically gives you the quest then to go ahead and find all these allies scattered around the map and free them before ARC can take all their powers and recover, as you'll see, like the humanity supremacy and a war will break out.
Okay. Do you think we should skip?
Yeah.
All right. So now that we're in, I'm going to go ahead and I can hear an enemy outside the door. The second ability turns you into Ghost, so you can go through walls and the enemies won't see you, but you're vulnerable at your start point, and then it'll turn back in a few seconds. So the use of this ability is to go through the level and see new areas to plan out how you
So as you can see, when an enemy first sees you, it won't exactly be sure what it's seeing. It'll just try to go to that general area. But if it's been in your line of sight for a handful of seconds, it'll then realize, wait a second, that's not supposed to be there, and then it'll try to attack you, whether trying shooting at you or hitting you with its baton.
So here's the third ally, the dragon. It gives us the roar ability, which creates a big chicken sound, breaks glass, and alerts nearby enemies. So I'm going to trap this enemy and break the glass to get by this long one. Now I'll save again. Make sure I respawn here. Here's the fourth ally, the slime. This one will give us an ability that allows us to run at a high speed and jump a lot higher. So I think we're going to cut it there.
Actually, hold on, I think you were first. Okay, so going through some reflections from the development.
Right. So one thing about designing the level in particular is having everything be open-ended. We decided to just have one large open map that the player can just explore freely. Doing that was certainly an exercise. There was a lot of stuff that had to get cut off. Certain mechanics that I wanted to implement for more varied stealth, some area-specific stuff.
So I am not actually a career audio designer. I learned it entirely for this project, and it was a slow experience beginning out, especially because of how important audio is to stealth. You need to know where the enemies are, so you need to hear their footsteps. You need to hear when they've alerted to your presence. And so I had to focus a lot of my effort on finding ways to distinguish sounds to make sure that the player knows, okay, this is communicating a certain bit of information about the game. And so for me, it was important to both have aesthetic and make sure that I was actually making useful and distinct sounds for the player.
For the art, I learned to be more mindful of unreal sizing and directions when I'm making the models in another software. And also I learned to make interactive animation of two separate characters, the kill animation. And also I learned how to make props models, a lot of models, more efficiently together.
So, this isn't, of course, our first Unreal project, but this has definitely been the longest one. And because of that, there's been the most amount of time for design overwrites. So I have the tendency to, when we get a design, I just run with it. And there'd be a lot of times where I'd run with it and it'd be like, wait a second, actually, hold on. Let's do a stealth game. And then I'd run with that. And it's like, wait a second, hold on. Let's make the enemies smarter. So that was a sort of a big part, a lot of iteration in this game. The AI was definitely the most challenging to do as a programmer, just because I'm used to AI being like, oh, if they don't see you, they chill. If they see you, they attack you. This one is significantly more complex than what I'm used to. But it was really interesting learning how to do all that. And especially having those sort of systems work with everything else, especially like the saving system and whatnot. It was a learning experience for sure.
All right, and then as for narrative, the most important thing that I've learned probably was like balancing like the immersion with info dumping. As you saw on the screen, there was a lot of text, and that was mainly like something I heavily edited when I first from what I first had, and it's because like a lot of the game is like heavily based on like the story behind this organization and their motives and the reason for wanting like to play as this chicken and going and freeing these animals. So I needed to make sure I kept it like concise enough that you knew what you were doing in the game, but then gave like not too info dumpy and like too much for the player. And I also had an experience to write different characters because up till now, all of my games, it's been mostly single player. So I got the chance to write different characters and made sure they were like unique in their own sense to help add to the story. And also like backstory and lore kind of related to like the immersion and like the different characters, making sure they were all like again unique and like all fit into like the whole story of like Ark.
Right, so things for the future. Again, there was a fair amount of stuff that got cut. We do have a very large map to work with. It was originally going to be a lot larger. There were going to be different levels to the whole thing. Again, adding to the stealth. There's going to be a lot more vent play, a lot of platforming, stuff like that. Might go back and revisit that again. Again, unique mechanics, maybe sector-specific stuff. I wanted to play with the player senses. That includes like sight, hearing. So maybe a sector's dark. Maybe you have to turn on power. Maybe you have to turn off a noise machine or something. And all of that would kind of play around with not only the player senses, but also the guard senses and affect like how you interact with them. But that was big, that had to be cut back. But a lot of what we have right now is a lot of ability play, so.
So when I worked on sounds, what I prioritized was sounds that were useful for gameplay, and a lot of what we have left is sounds that are interesting, sounds that add character to the game. So when you look in the dialogue, there's just one little sound that plays when you skip a box. We wanted to have the animals make passive noises, something interesting. A long time ago, we cut out voice acting because it just wasn't plausible. We want like random variants of sounds, like enemies who are standing still will play like a radio sound, and we want to have more versions of that so that it's more interesting to hear them, and that like one individual enemy might have its own little sound so you know where you are.
For the art, I wanted to add more variants of environment assets like furnitures, and also the animal NPCs are all rigged, but there's only one idle animation. I would like to add more animations of that.
So one thing, going into this game, as I said before, I didn't really go in with the idea of making a super complex AI. In hindsight, there probably could have been a better sort of design plan if I took a step back first. And if I did that, I would be able to maybe add more complex reactions. Maybe if you jump over a table, the AI would think, wait a second, that thing just jumped over the table, let me go around that. I think things like that would elevate the sort of stealth aspect of the game, sort of trying to outwit these guards. So that would be pretty cool to do.
And then finally for narrative, James mentioned this already, but we wanted to do voice acting in the beginning because Cinder is the voice inside your head, so we figured what better way to like personify that than have someone actually speak to you throughout the game in addition to the words, just so you hear it and you see it. We also wanted to do cutscenes. You saw in the beginning how it was kind of like a slideshow type situation, but we originally wanted to like go big and do like animated cutscenes, which we realized very quickly would not happen. But if we had more time, that's something we wanted to add. And then flashbacks for the animal dialogue. So instead of it being like a one-on-one conversation, you would actually get to see like, again, the experiments happening kind of through like a flashback cutscene type situation.
All right, so that's all. Any questions?
I really like the game. Do you have any future plans for it?
All right, so do we have any future plans for it?
Right now, like, I guess we aren't set on continuing, but there's still like a handful of plans that we think would be cool to enact on. So I guess it's somewhat tentative in that way.
We're going to be demoing at Game Fest this weekend, so we have a little bit more to work on, a little bit of time to make some tweaks, and we might publish on itch, depending on how we're feeling about those tweaks and how our demo goes. There are some changes that we still want to make, but the group isn't going to stay together for a long time, so we're not completely sure.
Challenges that you face with the levels when trying to consider both the stealth and the abilities that are there.
Okay, so the question was, what are some of the design challenges that we faced with the level?
So Jay and I in particular had to work closely together on figuring out the AI, figuring out what kind of layout worked best for them. First it was maybe a bit too narrow, afterwards maybe it was a bit too large. So it was kind of, one, finding the right size, and two, maintaining like a good flow for the player to go to. Like no matter what direction you go to at the start, it's going to be stealth heavy, but you're not like outright punished for just exploring on your own, because that would just be kind of stupid. And then later on, as you accumulate more and more skills, you find routes to places that you didn't really expect to find before. Maybe there's creative ways that you can mess around with the enemy AI as well. So it's not, but it never really goes to the extent of really breaking the stealth. It's more so an enhancement, a feature, something like that.
Required. Because I didn't use all of them at different points. We also progressed all of ours, but are there ways to get around the guards, get through places without necessarily using the abilities, and those would just sort of make it easier.
You can get through the level without using abilities. Like you can get to any point, but the goal of the game is to get all of the abilities. So Anton has designed the level in a way where there are certain areas where it'll be a priority, and I think he can describe that in more detail.
Yeah. So during development, for example, one specific reference that I kind of drew on, even though I haven't really played it, is Thief. One of the big things about stealth in particular is like respecting the player's agency. So you can choose to go through with abilities, you can choose not to. Either way, the experience that you're going to have is going to be different. For example, we didn't get to see it, but there is a stealth kill, because that's funny. Maybe you want to spend your time stealth killing enemies, but that has a really long cooldown. So you're going to spend a lot of time doing that. You might spend a lot of time killing a bunch of enemies, but your rooms are going to be a lot more clearer. Whereas maybe you want to get to the end quicker. You still have a lot of enemies to go through. You're going to have to be careful. There's a lot of different ways to play around with what the level has, but it's never really forcing the player down any one route. So, yeah, sure.
Quickly building off on that though, so to actually win the game, you do need to get every ability. We didn't see this room, but there is a locked door, and if you get all the abilities, that door becomes unlocked, and then if you get through there, you can activate the console that basically deactivates all the cells. So in a way, you do have to do it, but the order at which you do it, the sort of way you prioritize different abilities, that's completely up to you. During playtesting, we found so many different routes. Each route had their own style. So I guess, yeah, if that answers the question. Oh, I can't see anything. I can't see anything. Oh, yes.
Why chicken?
Okay, so the question was, why chicken? Funny. Does anyone have a better answer?
The chicken developed really early on because the original pitch for this game was, well, it was completely different, but the name stayed the same, which was you would be an animal breaking out other animals from a zoo. And we thought, oh, maybe it would be like a roguelike, or maybe it would be combat-based. And it's a long process that turned that into stealth. We did a lot of design in the first couple of weeks. But the chicken was one of the interesting things where, well, okay, it's out of place in a zoo, it's out of place in a prison lab thing, and it's just such a funny contrast to its surroundings that, you know, once it came to us, we felt like we had to keep it.
Actually, and beyond that, there are, mechanically, gameplay-wise, there are certain benefits to having the chicken. For one, the fact that you're such a small little animal, that completely changes the way you sort of deal with the AI. For one, you can, small little things, you don't really notice them at your feet. If you can get, by a guard's feet, you can sort of linger there, and they won't know. Same with the vents. We saw that when you got to the Kitsune room. Those little narrow spaces, that's something that it would be hard for, a human to squeeze through, but a chicken, that's perfect. So in a lot of ways, also, the chicken's, form factor plays a lot into the game. It's tactical. Any other questions? the question, I can't, yeah, there.
I really like the abilities that you put in your game. I was wondering how you actually got to all these different mythical creatures' abilities that help your gameplay.
So, I will say like point blank, originally this game was like heavily inspired by one of my like favorite TV shows I watch, which deals with all kinds of like more supernatural creatures. So then I took a turn because that one episode they didn't feature a dragon. So I went from there and I was like, okay, what else would fit with a dragon? And that's kind of how we got there. And then as for powers, because we decided like we were going to go stealth based, we thought, okay, well, what can they do that would help us in a stealth game, but also give us like freedom to like roam the level as we pleased. So like for the golem, you didn't see the golem, but that is the stealth kill. But we thought, okay, golem's like big, strong, and like if we like were able to show it, it just breaks like the guard's neck. So that's how it kind of fits together.
Wait, do we want to see the chicken kill? All right. So we can answer questions while I get that set.
Yeah, okay, we can do that. Okay, yeah. There's a question over there.
I wanted to ask about voice acting. So you guys said that you had plans going forward to possibly implement voice acting. I know it was mentioned that the voice in your head would be given a voice. Would you give all of the characters voice acting or just the voice in your head because that might be more poignant? What would your plans be going forward?
The question was, we plan to add voices to the phoenix. Would we add voices to the other animals?
So ideally, yes, I'd want to add voices to all the all the animals because hopefully once we get the voice acting in, we can get the flashbacks so you can have the voice like over as like this flashback is showing like the animal's time in captivity. All right, and now without further ado, it's kill time. But while we wait, any other questions?
So I was wondering what went into like the lighting and graphics side of things. Did you guys? Yo.
The question was about like environmental, right?
So in terms of lighting and graphics, due to like the limited textures that we do have, I decided to differentiate our like main areas by like colored lighting. That was one thing. I didn't go too heavy on the shading. I pretty much all the lights that you see here are basically point lights that do not cast shadows, because that also kind of chugs on machines. And Cam actually made an outline shader for us. You can see it. You can see it's like it's slightly there. We at one point in time we tried to do like a sort of 2D art style sort of thing. So we have like black outlines on a lot of the stuff. So it's kind of hand drawn. I don't know. Anyone else? Any other questions? Nope. All right.
How about that? There we go. Okay. All right. Well, all right. So just a couple reminders. Oh, some people asked when is it actually due. LMS submission will be for Monday, so you have some time to do any last tweaks. I know a lot of you have work to do for Game Fest as well, so I'll give you some time for that. And so again, just a couple reminders. So tomorrow, 1 p.m., Ilya Musavijad will be giving his talk in Sage 2411. Hope you can join us for that. And Game Fest is this Saturday afternoon down at the Center of Gravity. Also Friday evening at the Art Center of the Capital Region downtown in Troy is the Electronic Arts Senior Thesis Show, the Creative Seminar Show. So try and make it out for that. And then also Saturday evening is the spring concert. So we have a busy weekend coming up ahead of us. Well, so again, thanks everybody for a terrific semester. I had a lot of fun. I hope you all did too. I'm glad that this is being recorded so that I can take the bits that were the lessons learned and then show that to next year's class, because I think that will be helpful for them. I hope you all had a lot of fun with these projects and learned a lot. And yeah, thanks again. Have a great summer and everything.